The formidable fleet materialized, then inexplicably vanished. Hundreds of ships, the very essence of the Knights Templar's power, were either disbanded, disappeared, or dissolved without a trace. No wreckage emerged, no cargo washed ashore, not a single survivor was ever found. They did not succumb to the depths, nor did they ever return to port. No message was left behind, and their whereabouts have remained a profound mystery ever since. It is as if the ocean itself embraced an enormous secret, one so vast that no empire dared to demand answers, until now. Yet your presence here is not for tales of thunder and fire. You are drawn by a subtle intimation, a gentle ripple across placid waters, a name whispered in a forgotten chronicle. You are not merely seeking an answer, you are diligently following a trail. This compelling trail now leads you westward into the encroaching fog. Close your eyes and truly listen. The masts groan in the night wind, a symphony of ancient wood. The sting of salt permeates your skin. Somewhere in the enveloping darkness, waves rhythmically strike a hull, laden with gold, sacred relics, or perhaps something even more ancient than myth itself. The year is 1307, and you stand upon the very docks of La Rochelle, France. Behind you, torches cast flickering shadows beneath the city's formidable stone towers. Before you, the boundless Atlantic stretches into infinity. Anchored at the precipice of that old world lies the most formidable fleet Europe had ever witnessed. Templar ships, tall and slender, their black silhouettes sharply defined against the moonlight, adorned with crimson crosses. This was no mere merchant convoy or a minor crusader flotilla. These were vessels of immense warcraft and accumulated wealth, meticulously constructed over decades, powered by intricate trade routes, invaluable papal favors, and something far more profound, a power the French crown could not purchase and the church dared not touch. Secrets, meticulously encased in oak and iron, once rode the tides between two continents, and then abruptly, nothing. History painstakingly records the terrestrial events. On October 13th, 1307, a date notably and truly a Friday the 13th, King Philip IV of France unleashed a ruthless, coordinated campaign against the Knights Templar. Arrests ensued, confessions were coerced under torture, and flames licked menacingly at both parchment and flesh. That segment of history is meticulously documented. However, the fleet remained utterly silent. Even the most dedicated chroniclers could not feign knowledge of its destination. One might naturally assume its destruction, yet there are no reports of naval engagements, no epic sagas of storms, no precious cargo ever found bobbing in the surf. This formidable fleet, numbering dozens, if not hundreds of ships, simply slipped the very leash of recorded time. It bequeathed no bones, no sails, no timber. It left behind only an abundance of profound questions. And here lies the most astonishing aspect. No one genuinely pursued them, not with serious intent. It was as if the world collectively desired to erase the memory of an order possessing such vast maritime capability, vanishing on the very night its leaders were captured. We shall endeavor to jointly uncover the profound why behind this mystery, not through resounding declarations, but through careful, quiet footsteps, exploring one harbor, one monastery, one ruined chapel, one whispered fragment of an ancient, prematurely drawn map at a time. You will meticulously trace the contours of forgotten coastlines. You will intuitively navigate through shadows deeper than the darkest night. And perhaps, just perhaps, you will ultimately unearth what has been inexplicably absent since that pivotal October dawn. Let us establish one crucial point. This endeavor extends beyond mere ships. This is an exploration of power, both sacred and profane. It delves into the delicate distinction between utter annihilation and strategic escape. It seeks to comprehend why, at times, to truly endure, one must paradoxically vanish. So compose yourself. Allow the boundless sea to envelop your imagination. Before we venture deeper into these profound shadows, ensure you subscribe. This guarantees you will never overlook a secret that history has diligently attempted to erase. You perceive it first as an immense weight, not a physical burden, but the profound pressure emanating from secrets too monumental to articulate. The Templar fleet was not merely a naval force, it constituted a formidable vault, a hushed whisper, a stark warning. Its disappearance was not merely an enigma, it was meticulously purposeful, for what truly vanished was not solely wood and sailcloth. It was the invaluable cargo these vessels bore, the profound ideals they represented, and the inconvenient truths they threatened to reveal. By 1307, the Knights Templar had transcended their role as mere holy warriors. They had evolved into Europe's most potent transnational bank. Their holdings spanned the entire continent, enjoying tax privileges granted by the Pope himself, and commanding access to ports stretching from Acre to Aragon. However, their most invaluable asset was unequivocally trust. Monarchs and merchants alike entrusted the Templars with unimaginable fortunes. This unparalleled financial leverage afforded them influence far exceeding what even the Vatican found comfortable. When King Philip IV of France, burdened by crippling debt from costly wars against England and Flanders, sought relief from the Templars' opulent vaults, he was met with a resolute, quiet refusal. There is a compelling reason why, during the widespread arrests, Philip's agents did not exclusively apprehend knights. He dispatched men specifically to search for ledgers, scrolls, and maps. The crown implicitly understood that the true wealth was not stockpiled gold hidden beneath the temple in Paris. It was mobile, movable, strategically located somewhere offshore. This precisely is why the fleet assumed such paramount importance. This operation transcended mere cargo transportation from port to port. The Templar ships functioned as armored seafaring banks, possessing the capability to swiftly relocate entire treasuries within days. Unlike static land-based strongholds, a cohesive fleet could scatter, vanish, or sail to welcoming shores far beyond the reach of any king. Consequently, when the arrests finally occurred, more than just time was at stake. A powerful motive propelled their actions. Some historians tend to downplay the true scale of Templar maritime holdings, characterizing them as marginal compared to the grandeur of later navies. However, such assessments often rely predominantly on royal naval records, precisely the very archives where the Templars, operating with semi-clerical autonomy, were seldom mentioned. Yet numerous merchants across the Mediterranean routinely reported sailing alongside Templar vessels, and pilgrims frequently booked passage aboard their ships. These were not phantom boats. They comprised a sophisticated shadow network, intimately known to those who required their services, and cleverly invisible to those who sought their destruction. And then there are the relics. In our modern era, it is simple to scoff at the notion of a chalice or a mere scrap of fabric dictating the fate of kingdoms. Yet in 1307, relics were not merely sacred objects. They were a potent form of currency. The Templars were widely rumored to possess an abundance of such artifacts. A revered shard of the true cross, the hallowed lance of Longinus, and even chilling whispers of a bearded, mummified head referred to as Baphomet by their accusers, allegedly worshipped in clandestine candlelit rituals. Whether these were authentic or cleverly fabricated by inquisitors, such stories imbued the Templars with an aura of forbidden power, a power transcending mere money, something that absolutely necessitated concealment at any cost. This compelling evidence leads to a profoundly controversial suggestion. What if the fleet's purpose extended beyond merely evacuating wealth and personnel? What if it was also safeguarding invaluable knowledge? The Templars were not monks in the conventional sense, yet they were remarkably literate, exceptionally organized, and deeply connected to extensive networks of scholars, master builders, and astrologers. During the Crusades, they encountered Arabic texts on navigation, advanced mathematics and astronomy, knowledge that had not yet substantially permeated European thought. Some firmly believe they meticulously copied and preserved these texts. Others whisper of even more extraordinary items, untranslated scrolls, intricately coded diagrams, and proto-cartographic sketches depicting lands beyond the then-known world. Therefore, when the order faced its inevitable collapse, far more was at stake than mere gold. Records of Philip's relentless raids frequently mention the alarming urgency with which some Templar houses deliberately incinerated their own archives. Scribes precipitously fled or mysteriously vanished. Documents were systematically destroyed. However, a select few clerks, under the duress of torture, spoke of advanced warnings, of horses disappearing in the dead of night, of ships silently departing under the shroud of moonlight. While these accounts do not constitute irrefutable proof, the recurring pattern strongly suggests a pervasive sense that some within the order anticipated the impending crackdown and made meticulous preparations. And where better to safely store the untraceable than aboard a fleet of ships? Naturally, this theory raises profound questions that historians continue to debate and frequently dismiss. If the Templars were indeed so meticulously prepared, why was the fleet never officially recorded as having departed La Rochelle? Why were there no confirmed sightings along the established trade routes? Surely someone, somewhere would have documented such a dramatic escape. Perhaps they did, and those records were simply erased. We shall address that intriguing possibility later. For now, consider this. The Templars possessed the requisite means, the compelling motive, and the critical time to execute their escape. They commanded a fleet capable of transporting not only men, but entire libraries, precious reliquaries, and vast treasuries. They maintained loyal ports along the western coast of France and beyond. And they possessed something even more crucial, an innate understanding that to truly survive meant to utterly vanish. That profound understanding may well have originated from bitter experience. In earlier crusades, they had witnessed cities fall overnight. They had observed holy relics being carted away as war trophies. They had seen kings turn their swords inward when foreign adversaries became too geographically distant. The signs had been evident for years. And the fleet? The fleet was their meticulously crafted contingency plan. It is all too easy to forget, as your mind drifts back to La Rochelle, that concealment is not always an act of cowardice. Sometimes it is a brilliant strategic maneuver. Sometimes it represents the sole means to prevent power from falling into unscrupulous hands. And sometimes it is the only way to meticulously preserve an invaluable truth. Behind you, the city begins to stir. Word of the arrests has inevitably begun to spread. Horses clatter urgently on cobblestones. Torches hiss against the damp stone. Yet at the docks, the mooring lines are conspicuously absent. The ships that once groaned under the immense weight of Europe's unspoken past are no longer anchored. They have slipped away silently, perfectly, as if their presence there had never been real at all. You can almost discern the pervasive chill in the air, the sharp tang of salt and iron hanging heavy over the port of La Rochelle on the fateful eve of October 12th, 1307. The sky above bruises to a deep purple at dusk, laden with the impending breath of autumn, as gulls issue warnings that no one comprehends. The city, strategically one of the most vital ports on the Atlantic coast, is enveloped in an unnerving stillness. Ships gently bob in the harbor, Templar banners rustling almost imperceptibly in the wind. A solitary bell tolls from the fortress tower, and somewhere inland, hooves strike stone in a rhythm too precise to be mere happenstance. This was undeniably no ordinary night. The French king's draconian orders had already been signed, sealed, and whispered into the ears of sheriffs, bailiffs, bishops, and spies. Every corner of France was poised to erupt in a coordinated, devastating strike against the most powerful religious military order in all of Europe. Yet here, on the westernmost edge of the continent, the fleet remained eerily silent and patiently poised, like chess pieces awaiting either to be swept from the board or to be played in a final, desperate move. Records meticulously preserved from the royal court confirm that Philip IV had been meticulously planning the mass arrest of the Templars for months, possibly even longer. However, there is a peculiar and unsettling element in the timing. The official arrest orders were dispatched just days prior to the actual strike. Yet reports from royal agents stationed along the coast suggest that a number of Templar ships had already departed La Rochelle before the warrants were even executed. Not all of them, certainly, but enough to ignite profound suspicion, enough to strongly imply prior knowledge. Thus, the crucial question persists: who provided the warning? Two names frequently surface in connection with this mystery, albeit always shrouded in a haze of ambiguity. The first is Guillaume de Nogaret, Philip's ruthless advisor and chief enforcer. His indelible fingerprints are visible across every aspect of the operation. However, some argue that Nogaret's own ambitious nature might have compelled him to formulate contingency plans, particularly should the Templars decide to resist. Could he then have strategically leaked the timeline to preserve his own leverage? The second name is Pope Clement V himself, who found himself precariously caught in a relentless tug-of-war between the powerful king and the formidable knights. While publicly complicit in the arrests, Clement notably hesitated, delayed, and vacillated in his actions. Is it conceivable that he dispatched a quiet messenger westward, a final act of either profound betrayal or merciful intervention. Regardless of the source, the outcome was precisely the same. Ships began to mysteriously disappear from the official manifest. Remarkably, a chronicler from a nearby monastery, writing several weeks later, described witnessing a distinct line of sails silently slipping into the gray morning fog a full 2 days before the widespread crackdown. He initially assumed it was a routine merchant convoy. Yet Templar vessels were renowned for their deliberate, silent navigation, and some of the Order's most skilled navigators were specifically stationed at La Rochelle. A fleet of this substantial size, executing movement under the cloak of twilight, would not have been impossible. It would have been an act of sheer genius. Some researchers point to a surviving entry within the records of La Rochelle itself, a brief, almost nonchalant note, scribbled without any particular emphasis, concerning harbor activity on the 11th. It mentions 10 ships, unflagged but known, weighed anchor at dawn. No stated destination. This entry might be utterly meaningless in isolation, but given the cataclysmic events that followed, that seemingly bland observation reverberates like a silent scream in the dark. Herein lies the profound complication. By the 12th, the fleet should have been conspicuously present. Witnesses later claimed that by the morning of the 13th, the very day of the arrests, the harbor was virtually devoid of Templar ships. Some asserted that the vessels had departed to transport grain or essential supplies to other commanderies. Others adamantly insisted they had been moved inland due to severe foul weather warnings. A select few, speaking in hushed tones, genuinely believed they had sailed for England or Ireland, carrying not provisions, but an immense treasure. And still, none of them were ever found. It is a striking fact that historians readily acknowledge but frequently gloss over. No detailed inventory of the Templar fleet at La Rochelle has ever survived. We can approximate its size through meticulous cross-referencing of trade logs, donation records, and port taxes. Yet not a single master ledger specifically listing the ship's remains. Either none was ever meticulously kept, or it was deliberately and systematically destroyed. And that absence in itself is profoundly revealing. Consider for a moment the palpable atmosphere within the Templar ranks in the crucial weeks preceding the arrests. While the knights stationed on land may have grown dangerously complacent, convinced of their inherent sanctity or indispensable role to be targeted, the mariners, many of whom were lay brothers or contracted sailors, were rarely so naive. The unforgiving seas instilled a profound pragmatism. The whispers of political intrigue carried on the wind, and those working the bustling docks would undoubtedly have perceived the ominous signs. More than once, scribes noted unseasonal activity around the Templar warehouses. Carts arriving and departing at unusual hours, scrolls meticulously packed alongside ordinary food and wine. One account notably mentions a small crate, securely nailed shut, conspicuously marked with a crimson serpent. Another recollection describes a locked chest discreetly handed off to a knight, bearing no discernible crest, who then vanished into the shadows without uttering a single word. What precisely were they moving? Perhaps immense wealth, or something that absolutely could not be permitted to fall into royal hands? And if so, why was there no widespread panic? This lies at the very heart of the scholarly debate. Some argue vehemently that there was no coordinated evacuation. Rather, the fleet's disappearance was fragmented, accidental, merely the chaotic consequence of individual commanders reacting to an unfolding crisis. Others suggest, with equal conviction, that the entire operation was meticulously scripted, akin to a pre-planned theatrical performance, complete with orchestrated escape routes, carefully designated decoy ships, and destination ports already primed to receive them. One particularly intriguing clue emerges from a Templar commander in Western Brittany. In a letter dated October 10th, discovered only centuries later within a private archive, it references preparations for the transfer of inventory to Iberian custody and conspicuously mentions night sails under pre-arranged light. The phrase has perplexed translators, but its tone is undeniably covert. Iberian custody? Could this be an early subtle hint at the Portuguese connection we shall later explore? For now, the scene remains vividly present with you, poised at the very edge of the docks. The town is either genuinely asleep or meticulously pretending to be. The castle lights are discreetly dimmed. The fleet is either already gone or in the process of slipping away ship by silent ship. No alarms blare, no pursuit is initiated. just the soft, rhythmic flap of canvas and the gentle hush of waves against ancient stone, accompanied by the quiet, weighty knowledge that something monumental is shifting before dawn. You step back from the water's edge, your boots slick with mist, and instinctively turn toward the inland road. Somewhere out there, riders gallop furiously toward Templar manors. Arrests await. Torture-consuming fire, profound betrayal. But at sea, only an absolute silence reigns. You now drift through an epoch when Europe still firmly believed its meticulously crafted maps encompassed the entire world. Before the advent of telescopes, before compass roses intricately dotted every corner of a burgeoning globe, there existed the sea, both a formidable boundary and an expansive bridge. And into that boundless watery uncertainty, the Knights Templar launched not merely ships, but an audacious vision. Not necessarily of conquest, but fundamentally of movement, of control, and of an elusive freedom. Their impressive fleet was certainly not an overnight creation. It emerged from an undeniable necessity, forged in the intense crucible of the Crusades, and meticulously sharpened by the demands of burgeoning trade. Initially, the order harbored no significant maritime ambitions. They were primarily established as devoted protectors of pilgrims, not as merchants or skilled navigators. However, protection in time invariably necessitated transportation, and transportation in turn demanded ships. With every port they successfully entered, with every crucial favor granted by pope or prince, the Templars meticulously constructed an intricate web, one that stretched from the dusty docks of Acre to the windswept harbors of Brittany. By the late 13th century, they were not merely operating a handful of vessels. They were skillfully managing one of the most extensive private maritime networks across all of Christendom. They possessed an almost unsettling clarity in their understanding of logistics. If the French crown excelled in rigid bureaucracy and the Venetian Republic in astute commerce, the Templars quietly mastered both, effectively afloat. They meticulously developed a centralized system of commanderies, regional headquarters that meticulously coordinated the movement of goods, people, and vital information. These commanderies, particularly those strategically located near key ports such as Marseille, La Rochelle, and Lisbon, functioned as indispensable loading stations and formidable naval hubs. Ships could be expertly equipped, meticulously repaired, or discreetly concealed within days. Orders were disseminated via intricately coded letters, frequently disguised as religious texts or written in numerical ciphers to meticulously avoid interception. The popular image of Templars vividly depicts armored knights fearlessly riding into battle beneath a blood-red cross. Less iconic, yet equally powerful, is the mental image of these very same men meticulously calculating grain reserves in Acre, precisely weighing gold in Antioch, or skillfully plotting courses through the Strait of Gibraltar under the luminous moonlight. They underwent training in finance with the same rigorous discipline as they did in arms. It is therefore unsurprising that their ships did not exclusively transport soldiers. They also carried highly skilled scribes, master masons, innovative engineers, and even early physicians. These were not merely vessels of war, they were sophisticated floating command centers. One unequivocally confirmed historical fact vividly illustrates the sheer breadth of their operations. In 1291, following the devastating fall of Acre, the Templars orchestrated one of the largest organized naval evacuations in medieval history. With the city encircled and burning fiercely, they skillfully utilized their fleet to ferry not only knights, but also terrified civilians, invaluable archives, and sacred relics to safety. Few fleets of that era could have matched such rapid response capability. Fewer still could have accomplished it without requiring explicit royal permission. This brings us to one of the more obscure, yet profoundly significant details: the Templar practice of dual flagging. To mitigate the constant risks of piracy or unwarranted interference, many of their ships sailed under secular banners, those of local noble houses, or even seemingly neutral merchant guilds. In theory, this tactic allowed them to seamlessly blend in, to effectively masquerade as harmless traders. In practice, it also afforded them the critical flexibility to navigate ports that might otherwise have been overtly hostile to their order. Some of their vessels were reportedly observed bearing Genoese or Catalan colors, despite possessing no discernible connection to those republics. One particular Templar ship, confiscated in Cyprus, was found to carry forged letters of passage from 3 distinct kingdoms, each meticulously sealed in wax, and each containing curiously contradictory instructions. Whether this represented sophisticated deception or cunning diplomacy remains a subject of ongoing debate. Historians largely agree on the impressive capacity of the Templar fleet, yet they fiercely contend over its ultimate intent. Were the Templars secretly constructing a clandestine maritime empire, or were they merely leveraging their ships to support their extensive land-based holdings? Some firmly believe the answer lies in the subtle yet discernible shifts in their operational priorities during the final, tumultuous decades of the Order's existence. Records painstakingly preserved from Templar archives reveal a consistent increasing investment in coastal commanderies. Trade agreements with North African ports conspicuously increased. There was a notable spike in cargo manifests detailing spices, luxurious textiles, and salt, items not strictly required by soldiers, but highly coveted by astute merchants. More curiously, internal ledgers contain references to cargo of uncertain value or relocations for the preservation of our aims, phrasing sufficiently vague to ignite entire fields of conspiratorial inquiry. And this is precisely where the debate sharpens its edge. Some scholars vigorously argue that this was simply strategic diversification. After all, the devastating fall of the Holy Land compelled the Templars to profoundly reevaluate their fundamental role. With no clear immediate war to wage, their ships naturally pivoted toward commerce. Others perceive something far more deliberate, a profound pivot toward absolute autonomy. Possessing their own formidable navy, their own astute bankers, and their own swift message couriers, the Templars were inexorably drifting closer to becoming a truly sovereign force, answerable to neither pope nor king. It is this very independence, perhaps, that ultimately sealed their tragic fate. You recall now, from the hushed quiet of a previous chapter, the crates discreetly moved under the cloak of darkness at La Rochelle, those meticulously marked not with crosses, but with enigmatic symbols, serpents, stars, towers. You reflect upon the mention of night sails under prearranged light. Who else could operate with such unerring precision except those who had meticulously rehearsed such maneuvers for decades? By the time Philip IV finally turned his rapacious gaze upon the Templars, their fleet had already become a profound enigma. Their routes were not always diligently listed in port records. Their cargo was not always openly declared. Their very ships were not even always readily recognized. And that pervasive confusion, that ingenious plausible deniability, was not a sign of sloppiness. It was a meticulously crafted strategy. A knight may possess unwavering bravery, but a seasoned sailor must possess unparalleled cunning. And the Templar fleet was cunning in the extreme, manned by a diverse crew of mixed nationalities, fluent in Latin, Arabic, Occitan, and, crucially, the silent code of the wind. They possessed the ability to sail undetected at night without the aid of lanterns. They could seamlessly vanish into bustling fishing convoys or seek refuge in remote monastic islands, far from established trade routes. They had no need for conventional harbors. They could anchor discreetly in coves known only to them. It is no wonder, then, that when the Order finally collapsed, no one could locate the fleet. It had been meticulously designed not merely for transport, but fundamentally to elude. You stand again in your vivid imagination upon the cliff overlooking La Rochelle. Far below, waves churn in a ceaseless rhythmic motion. Somewhere beyond that vast horizon, something profound awaits. Not merely an unsolved mystery, but a formidable legacy of fluid motion, meticulous concealment, and absolute control. A fleet worthy of profound hiding. And even more significantly, a fleet that instinctively understood precisely how to conceal itself. The stone beneath your feet, now slick with the accumulated moisture of centuries, begs for attention. You trace the weathered, intricate curve of the old pier at La Rochelle, where tenacious weeds now twist through ancient cracks, and seagulls vociferously argue above the battlements. Yet if you simply close your eyes, you can almost distinctly hear it. Ropes tightening under strain, barrels rumbling over wooden planks, the dull thud of boots impacting against solid oak. For a fleeting moment, time itself folds, and you are unequivocally standing in the very place where the last Templar fleet was ever definitively observed. La Rochelle was far from just any port. It was the absolute keystone. While the Templars possessed holdings in dozens of coastal towns, La Rochelle represented their crown jewel, a formidable fortress and a crucial gateway nestled securely between the intricate politics of Paris and the yawning, boundless mouth of the Atlantic. Its natural harbor, both deep and inherently protected, rendered it ideally suited for launching extensive voyages, and its Templar-controlled quays afforded them a rare commodity in medieval Europe: absolute discretion. While other monastic orders were heavily reliant on royal ports and their associated permissions, the Templars meticulously constructed their own dockyards, their own sprawling warehouses, and even their own customs houses. Here they possessed the unparalleled capability to load a ship in absolute secrecy, free from the prying eyes of any bailiff, untouched by meddling merchant guilds, just loyal, skilled hands, meticulously trained eyes, and an enveloping silence. And it was unequivocally here that the fleet was last confirmed. One undeniably well-established fact stands out with stark clarity. In early 1307, La Rochelle was actively engaged in provisioning a specific group of Templar vessels, all under the direct supervision of Hubert Blanc, the regional preceptor. Surviving documents, some intricately embedded within property records, others scribbled into the margins of later legal disputes, meticulously describe deliveries of grain, salted fish, wax, and weaponry to the Templar docks. These were not mere local shipments. These constituted maritime stores explicitly intended for serious, long-range, high-value travel. But then abruptly the records cease. And that cessation is not merely poetic, it is quite literal. In the crucial weeks immediately following the October arrests, all official mention of Templar maritime activity in La Rochelle utterly vanishes. No port fees are recorded, no transfer notes exist, no ship repairs or anchor permits are issued. It is as if the fleet and its entire supporting infrastructure simply evaporated into thin air. What became of those dedicated dock workers? Of the meticulous clerks who tracked the manifests? Some were certainly arrested, but many simply disappear from the pages of history. Historians frequently attribute this to the chaos of war, to general disorder, to bureaucratic failure, but there exists a chilling counter-theory, that those who handled the last ships were meticulously silenced. Not necessarily by violence, but by sacred oath, by profound fear, or by the persuasive power of gold. There is a peculiar footnote, subtly buried within the regional annals of the time. A monk from nearby Saintes, writing in late November 1307, mentions that no ship of the temple hath returned nor sent message, though the port lay open to them. It reads like a lament, or perhaps a disquieting observation from someone who genuinely anticipated their return. And that very expectation, that is what elevates La Rochelle beyond a mere point on a map. It transforms it into a profound launchpad. But launched to where? Some legends assert they sailed west, toward the perpetual fog. Others suggest northward, into the treacherous English channels. Still others speak of southbound sails, vanishing into the welcoming expanse of Iberia. No definitive account explicitly survives, yet tantalizing hints cling to the narrative like stubborn barnacles. There is an obscure detail that continues to captivate fringe scholars. In a private letter from a disgraced former Templar knight, now meticulously preserved in a church archive in Bruges, the writer cryptically refers to the Great Parting at the Silvermouth, believed by some to describe the pivotal moment the fleet deliberately divided into smaller squadrons at the mouth of the Charente River near La Rochelle. If accurate, this would strongly suggest a preconceived plan, a deliberate dispersal, rather than a panicked, chaotic flight. And that crucial distinction lies at the very center of ongoing scholarly debate. Was this a real, coordinated escape, or merely a myth we have meticulously constructed around a bureaucratic black hole? Some argue vehemently that the absence of documentation does not definitively prove movement, that the fleet may have already been gone, perhaps dismantled, sold, or left to rot in the harbor. But if that were indeed the case, why did no one claim the ships? Why did no king seize them as valuable spoils of war? Maritime historians consistently note that such vessels, if truly abandoned, would have been swiftly repurposed by local powers. Yet no record of such a transfer exists. No cargo, no confiscated sails, no lawsuits over ship ownership, just an unsettling absence. And that profound absence has transformed La Rochelle into an irresistible magnet for myriad theories. Modern archaeological surveys of the area have thus far yielded nothing definitive. No sunken hulls have been found in the bay, no buried docks uncovered. However, there are perplexing, unexplained anomalies. A cluster of meticulously carved stones near the southern seawall bears the distinctive Templar cross, now worn nearly flat by the relentless wind, and one particular stone is etched with a date, interpreted by some as September 12th, placing it precisely 1 month before the arrests. The profound implication, a marker, possibly even a predetermined deadline. Of course, these stones could mean absolutely nothing, but when viewed in conjunction with the sudden surge in provisioning, the inexplicable vanishing of port records, and the eerie silence in royal dispatches, they begin to whisper with greater resonance. One fact remains unequivocally certain. After La Rochelle, the trail goes chillingly cold. No other port explicitly claims to have received the fleet. No chronicler meticulously writes of its arrival, and yet ships do not simply vanish, especially not vessels as meticulously maintained, as expertly crewed, as mission-ready as those of the Templars. Something definitively moved them, and that something was almost certainly orchestrated from this very location. You walk now along the crumbling battlements of the old Tour de la Chaîne, vividly imagining the flicker of torches across the channel below. Shadowy figures surreptitiously prepare for a night sailing. A final crate is hoisted aboard. A last hushed prayer is mumbled. Somewhere a captain nods once, a solitary signal for a departure that was centuries in the making. And then they are gone, into mist, into myth. And you, standing on the very same ancient stones, are left with only the ceaseless wind. The human eye is not a camera. It does not passively record, it actively remembers. And memories, much like elusive fog, shift and distort when directly confronted. This is the inherent challenge when one asks individuals what they witnessed on the fateful night the fleet vanished. Some vividly recall a distinctive light on the sails. Others claim to have heard only an absolute silence. Some adamantly swear they observed ships drifting purposefully into the dark horizon. Still others insist the docks were utterly bare long before the stars even emerged. Fact and intricate fiction intertwined, moving together like insidious currents, meticulously weaving around a profound truth that few dared to articulate aloud. But articulate they did. In the weeks immediately following the arrests of October 1307, scattered reports began to surface from the coast near La Rochelle. A fisherman named Loup, in a confession dated mid-November, claimed to have seen a black line of ships low in the tide moving west as the moon dipped. He vividly described the sails as wrapped, as though to hide their markings, and adamantly insisted they departed before the king's men even arrived. Loup himself was never seen again. Then there was the traveling monk who passed through the Saintonge countryside just days after the fleet's disappearance. He recorded in his personal journal, not a formal chronicle but a detailed travel record, that a stable hand in Rochefort spoke of horses and riders arriving at dawn bearing news that the Red Cross ships had flown. He offered no further elaboration, nor did he seem particularly interested. To him it was mere gossip, to us it is a tantalizing glimpse. There are numerous such accounts. Dozens, if not hundreds, have meticulously surfaced across the centuries. Letters, depositions, intimate family stories scribbled into the margins of ancient ledgers. A wine merchant's ledger from 1311, unexpectedly unearthed in the cellar of a ruined chateau, notably records that the Templar convoy bought no casks this year, gone perhaps like birds before frost. While sounding poetic, why would a wine trader even note this unless the absence was profoundly unusual? The true challenge lies in meticulously sifting what might be genuine from what is almost certainly fabrication. Take, for instance, the captivating tale of the night choir, recounted for generations by villagers in the Vendée region. According to local folklore, on the night of October 12th, a chorus of ghostly voices was heard offshore, chanting in Latin, their pitch rising and then fading with the tide. The following morning, strange cross-shaped impressions were discovered in the sand. It is an undeniably haunting story. It is also almost certainly a legend skillfully grafted onto actual events. Yet there remains something profoundly compelling about the remarkable consistency of these tales. So many of them coalesce around the same general image: ships departing quietly, deliberately, under the protective cover of twilight. No grand battle, no consuming fire, just silent motion and pervasive mist. And then there is the unsettling problem of the non-witnesses, those who should have spoken but conspicuously remained silent. La Rochelle was a bustling, vibrant port. Merchants, seasoned sailors, clerics, boisterous street hawkers. Yet after October 13th, a deafening silence permeates the surviving documents. For nearly 2 months, nothing in the city's civic records even remotely mentions the Templar docks. No taxes were collected, no leases transferred, no fines levied, no disputes recorded, no requisitions made. It is as if the very part of the city that had once hummed with fervent movement had fallen under an inexplicable spell of collective forgetfulness. Some scholars suggest this profound gap directly reflects widespread fear. Anyone who had witnessed or actively aided the fleet's escape risked severe implication in treason. Best then to utter nothing, better still to utterly forget. Others firmly believe there was active suppression, that Philip's agents not only ruthlessly seized property, but also meticulously confiscated records, systematically paid off informants, and deliberately destroyed any contradictory evidence. And this is precisely where matters become truly intriguing. A letter from a Genoese trader, written in early 1308, notably mentions the sudden disappearance of a fellow merchant who knew too much about what sailed from the French coast last autumn. He does not explicitly name La Rochelle. He does not directly mention the Templars. But the timing is undeniably exact, and the pervasive fear is palpable. Still, not all accounts were successfully erased. In a remote village near Bordeaux, a church manuscript meticulously details a sermon delivered in early 1308, explicitly warning parishioners not to consort with those who sail under stolen banners. The phrase is highly unusual. It does not accuse anyone of outright piracy, but it powerfully implies disguise, false flags, ships deliberately pretending to be something they are not. Could these have been Templar vessels in meticulous hiding, sailing stealthily along the coast under deceptive merchant colors? That captivating possibility brings us full circle to one of the more obscure eyewitnesses, a young cleric named Arnaud, whose personal notes were discovered centuries later, intricately sewn into the lining of a psalter. Arnaud had been visiting a monastery situated near the Gironde estuary. On October 14th, he wrote, "A small vessel came ashore before dawn. Men in cloaks disembarked. They bore no arms, but one carried a long chest wrapped in oilcloth. They asked no questions and gave no names. I offered them bread. They paid in foreign coin." Scholars have long debated Arnaud's account. Was it real? A parable? A hallucination? But the detail that most powerfully stands out is the foreign coin. If accurate, it strongly suggests that the fleeing Templars were already operating beyond the realm of French currency, utilizing wealth meticulously prepared for a journey far from their accustomed home. And so we are left with this: multiple accounts that agree in overall tone, if not in every precise detail. Some are official, some are mere whispers, some are passed down like cautionary bedtime stories. A select few are likely true. Others are undoubtedly embellished, confused, or outright fabrications. But all of them coalesce around the same hollow space in history, the conspicuous blank spot where the fleet should undeniably be. And is not that always the profound nature of ghosts? You rarely perceive them with absolute clarity. More often, you catch a fleeting hint, a quick flicker, a soft footstep on the stairs, or, in this compelling case, a red cross on a sail, subtly fading into the pervasive fog. The night of the 12th has long passed, but you can still acutely feel it, can you not? The way truth stubbornly lingers just beyond reach. The way profound silence at times conveys everything you truly need to comprehend. It is the profound quietude that most disquiets you, not the dramatic spectacle of fire and sword, not the thunderous clamor of hooves or the sharp clatter of armored boots against ancient stone. No. What truly stands out after the fleet vanishes is not chaos, but a pervasive absence. It is akin to a story that abruptly forgets its own principal characters. The chapter immediately following October 13th, 1307, is not filled with relentless pursuit or direct confrontation. It is filled with an absolute nothing, and that nothing is deafening in its implication. The Templars, once so conspicuously visible, so audibly present in parchment, tax records, and tithes, are suddenly hushed within the archives. This silence extends not merely to La Rochelle, but across the entirety of France, into Burgundy, Aquitaine, Aragon, and Flanders. Their names cease to appear. Ledgers abruptly trail off mid-column. Monasteries that once meticulously recorded every Templar shipment down to the last grain sack now fall utterly silent. If this were mere accident, one might perhaps forgive it, but the pattern is simply too precise, too chillingly complete. Therefore, we are compelled to ask, who orchestrates this absolute silence? It is a well-established fact that Philip IV's crackdown was far more than a series of arrests. It was a systemic, all-encompassing purge. The king's agents were not merely seizing men, they were seizing information. Templar treasuries were rigorously searched. Their expansive libraries were ruthlessly rifled through. Their extensive correspondence was systematically confiscated. And then came the trials, public, dramatic, and in truth, poorly documented. Many of the surviving transcripts were copied years later, and myriad contradictions riddle their margins. But one crucial aspect stands out. Very little was said about the fleet. Under the duress of torture, Templars confessed to kissing strange idols and spitting on the cross. Some swore they had worshipped Baphomet or consorted with demons or performed unspeakable rites. But what you rarely encounter is any mention of ships, of cargo, of meticulous plans. Only a mere handful of testimonies even allude to the fleet, and those that do are frustratingly vague. One condemned knight, Jean de Chalon, reportedly informed his inquisitors that the best of the order fled by sea. He did not specify where. He did not name a captain or a precise destination, but his phrase, the best, resonates profoundly. It implies not cowardice, but a deliberate selection, that some were chosen to leave, to preserve, or perhaps to intricately hide. This comment, preserved in a fragment of a 14th century account now meticulously stored in the Vatican secret archives, is frequently cited, but just as often dismissed. Some scholars contend it was an invention of later Romanticism. Others notably observe that Jean's execution swiftly followed his statement, perhaps too swiftly, and still the paper trail grows colder, more elusive. Where once hundreds of documents meticulously tracked the order's extensive operations, suddenly gaping chasms appear. Entire commandery inventories are missing. Letters are rendered unreadable due to water damage or possess curiously scorched edges. Royal registers feature pages inexplicably torn out. Even the Vatican's own registry noticeably pauses its accounting for weeks in late 1307, offering only the enigmatic phrase, "Further inquiries remain pending," before abruptly skipping ahead to later decrees. One obscure example, the Cathedral Archive of Angoulême, contains a fragment of parchment that may have once been part of a Templar charter. A faint watermark suggests it belonged to a set, but the other pages are utterly gone, missing since the early 14th century. According to a marginal note in a later hand, the scribe was instructed to remove all traces. The handwriting uncannily matches that of a known papal clerk. Is it a smoking gun? No, but it undeniably smells like smoke. Even more perplexing is the pervasive disappearance of maritime records. One would naturally expect ports from Galicia to Genoa to exhibit some indication of inbound Templar vessels. Instead, there is a distinct dip, a peculiar lull in activity. Between October 1307 and March 1308, several coastal regions reported fewer ship arrivals than usual, not zero, but noticeably fewer, almost as though something had moved quietly and deliberately between the normal lanes. And this is precisely where the open scholarly debate resides. Was this absence merely natural, or was it meticulously curated? Traditional historians lean heavily toward chaos theory. They argue that the arrest disrupted absolutely everything, trade, taxes, church reports, and that the pervasive silence merely reflects general disorder, not a deliberate cover-up. But others, more suspicious, more patient, perceive unmistakable fingerprints. They discern a fleet that did not merely disappear, but was systematically erased. Because erasure is, in some profound ways, far simpler than destruction. Destroy a ship, and you inevitably leave wreckage, bones, sails adrift. But erase its name from the ledger, remove the logbook from the archive, silence the dockmaster with a purse of silver. That is cleaner, quieter, and infinitely harder to meticulously trace. Of course, we must revisit an earlier crucial detail, the coded nature of Templar communication. Previous chapters hinted at scrolls ingeniously disguised as sermons, letters subtly masked in Latin hymns, roots whispered and never explicitly written. The order was meticulously prepared for secrecy, which renders the profound silence all the more purposeful, as if it were not a failure of history, but a deliberate, intricate design. You stand again in your contemplative thoughts beside the formidable cathedral doors of Poitiers, where royal scribes once diligently gathered to meticulously catalogue seized assets. The heavy wooden doors are now scarred, pitted by the relentless passage of time, but in your mind's eye they are newly closed. Behind them, the ink dries on papers never intended to be seen. You vividly imagine a clerk dipping his quill, meticulously scratching out names, not inventing new truths, but simply quietly removing the old ones. A powerful fleet thus becomes a mere footnote. A vital voyage transforms into a fleeting rumor, and history suffers a loss, not in battle, but in the insidious machinations of bureaucracy. There is a final haunting artifact worthy of note. A stone tablet recovered from a monastery in western France, broken into 3 distinct pieces and bearing the cryptic inscription, Silentium est salus nostra, silence is our salvation. Was it a profound prayer, a stark warning, or the ultimate Templar creed for survival? You may never truly know. But in this pervasive absence, in this sudden spreading hush, you begin to discern the unmistakable shape of something deeply hidden, not merely lost, but meticulously protected. The sea forgets, they say, but it only forgets what we silence first. The wind noticeably shifts now, colder, saltier, tinged with an untamed wildness. You have definitively left the meticulously controlled docks of La Rochelle behind. Gone are the sun-bleached harbors and the careful, efficient hands of Templar quartermasters. Now, you instinctively follow the powerful current northward, where the waters grow demonstrably rougher and the shores more inherently defiant. Here the rigid rules of kingdoms recede, and true refuge depends not on established law, but on unwavering loyalty. Scotland. It seems an extraordinarily unlikely sanctuary for Europe's most relentlessly hunted brotherhood. Yet that very improbability is precisely what renders it so profoundly plausible. In 1307, Scotland was a land embroiled in intense conflict, both against England and within its own fractured borders. King Edward I of England had mercilessly ravaged the countryside, yet Scottish resistance, fiercely led by the emerging figure of Robert the Bruce, burned with stubborn defiance. It was an era characterized by fractured alliances, exiled nobles, shifting loyalties, and smoke-thick hills where strangers could vanish without leaving a single trace. For men bearing forbidden symbols and harboring dangerous truths, it was not an inhospitable land. It was, paradoxically, perfect. And here lies the crucial historical foothold. Scotland, uniquely among its European peers, was never included in Pope Clement V's edict to arrest the Templars. While France acted with ruthless swiftness and England followed with icy hesitation, Scotland utterly disregarded the papal bulls. The prior excommunication of Robert the Bruce, following the murder of John Comyn in 1306, had already placed the kingdom squarely at odds with Rome. Consequently, when Clement's orders arrived, they carried scant authority north of the border. In essence, Scotland became one of the very few European regions where the Templars could exist, albeit quietly, without immediate threat of seizure. That fact alone is compelling, but the trail does not solely rest on absence. Rumors, of course, abound. Tales that some of the fleet's smaller ships landed on the western coast near Galloway or Argyll, that cloaked men disembarked beneath cloud-streaked moonlight and silently vanished into the ancient forests, that wagons heavily laden with mysterious chests rolled eastward under the protective cover of a storm. Most of these captivating stories originate from rich oral traditions, ballads, local parish yarns, and clan legends passed down like cherished family recipes. You would be entirely forgiven for dismissing them. And yet a few fragments stubbornly resist easy dismissal. A 14th century manuscript meticulously housed in the archives of Paisley Abbey notably mentions a gift of horses and armor from brethren of the temple, newly arrived and eager to serve a just cause. The document is undeniably cryptic. It never explicitly names the Knights Templar, but the compelling phrasing, brethren of the temple, and the date, spring of 1308, leave very little room for doubt. Elsewhere, carved into a pillar at Rosslyn Chapel, a building later steeped in Templar mythology, though itself constructed nearly a century later, are symbols that some believe predate the structure itself. Crosses indeed, but not the typical ecclesiastical kind. These are more precise, meticulously balanced, sharpened like the crosses intricately carved into the keels of Templar vessels. Most scholars agree that these marks were recarved during the chapel's construction, meticulously preserving older designs etched into the stonework long before. And then there is the infamous Lochaber map, purportedly discovered in a private Scottish collection in the 1800s, depicting a series of dotted lines stretching from the Atlantic coast to what appear to be monastic holdings deep within the Highlands. It was swiftly denounced as an elaborate forgery. But before its mysterious disappearance in a fire in 1932, a discerning scholar noted its highly unusual coordinate notation system, not commonly employed in northern cartography until well after the Templar period. Some dismiss it as pure nonsense. Others whisper that it contained knowledge illicitly smuggled aboard a ship. It would certainly not be the first instance of secret knowledge taking such a route. Recall the hushed claims from earlier chapters, of scrolls meticulously wrapped in oilcloth, of Arabic star charts painstakingly copied by Templar scribes, of relics and items enigmatically labeled cargo of uncertain value. If those precious items were truly intended to survive, they required a place not only of absolute safety, but also of profound obscurity. And Scotland, if nothing else, offered unparalleled obscurity. What truly lends weight to this theory is not merely legend, but impeccable timing. In the tumultuous years immediately following the Templar Purge, Robert the Bruce's fortunes experienced a sudden, dramatic shift. After years of unrelenting struggle, he began to achieve victories, not minor skirmishes, but decisive triumphs, such as the Battle of Loudon Hill in 1307, and later the legendary triumph at Bannockburn in 1314. His army was significantly outnumbered, poorly equipped, and strategically cornered. Yet somehow it utterly crushed the English. One controversial interpretation strongly suggests he received crucial assistance, not in the form of additional armies, but in superior strategy, meticulous logistics, and essential funding. An influx of highly trained fighters, hardened by years of desert warfare, suddenly found themselves unattached and with nowhere else to turn. It is, of course, pure speculation, but undeniably tantalizing. For in the years following Bannockburn, the Scottish crown astonishingly recovered with remarkable speed. New castles began to rise, new trade routes conspicuously opened, and Bruce, once excommunicated and outlawed, commenced negotiating on the international stage with the gravitas of a seasoned statesman. Coincidence or undeniable consequence? Even within established academia, the notion that Templars profoundly helped shape post-Purge Scotland is no longer considered entirely fringe. A growing number of discerning historians argue that, at the very least, small groups of fleeing knights likely found refuge with sympathetic Scottish lords, particularly those already embroiled in conflict with England, especially those who stood to gain everything from aiding known enemies of the Pope. And here we encounter a subtle, yet crucial callback. Remember the reference in the letter from Western Brittany, the one hinting at night sails and Iberian custody? That letter also obliquely refers to northern kin with cause, kin, not mere allies, as if some within the Templar ranks already possessed deep blood ties or ancient oaths with the fiercely independent clans of Scotland. That profound idea opens the door to even deeper conspiracies, such as the compelling claim that Templar families intermarried with Scottish nobles to meticulously preserve lines of power. It may sound like pure fiction, but for those safeguarding forbidden knowledge, the family tree may have been as strategically vital as the sword itself. There is one final detail worthy of mention. In 1312, the Pope formally dissolved the order. Most of their substantial assets were to be meticulously transferred to the Knights Hospitaller, but not in Scotland. There, the official property transfers never actually occurred. In fact, several former Templar lands remained in a peculiar legal limbo, neither claimed nor confiscated. Some were quietly managed by monastic proxies. Others simply remained utterly untouched, a haunting shadow left indelibly on the landscape, a whispered secret held enduringly in stone. You step now through a highland glen, the wind keening mournfully against ancient stone fences, long since unclaimed. Behind you, the sea is distant, yet the memory of sails still persistently lingers. And ahead, a winding trail curves upward into the mists, and maybe, just maybe, into history itself, patiently waiting to be unearthed. The sea noticeably narrows as you pass into the Hebridean waters, where the vast Atlantic breathes with a slower, more ancient rhythm, and the world itself feels profoundly older. Low-hanging clouds curl gracefully around hills that resemble sleeping giants, and the jagged coastlines of the Isle of Mull rise in stark silhouette, black stone sharply defined against a gray, brooding horizon. There are no grand processions here, no heraldry, only the ceaseless wind, the enduring rock, and the rhythmic cadence of waves that have whispered the same names for untold centuries. And among them, one name persistently recurs, the Templars. Not, of course, in official, meticulously documented histories, but in hushed whispers, on antique maps, annotated with fading ink, in intricately carved lintels, and amidst sunken ruins where curious tourists rarely tread. The Isle of Mull does not overtly shout its secrets. Instead, it allows them to slowly accumulate moss, to become part of the very fabric of the ancient land. If the Templar fleet truly scattered after its departure from La Rochelle, as compelling evidence strongly suggests, Scotland's Western Isles offered an unparalleled combination of remoteness and crucial access, out of convenient reach, yet not utterly unreachable. Mull, in particular, distinguished itself. Nestled strategically between major sea lanes, yet ringed by formidable cliffs, hidden caves, and sheltered coves, it presented a natural, ideal hideout for ships meticulously seeking to avoid detection. And in 1307, it lay firmly under the control of proud Gaelic clans who owed no allegiance to Edward of England or to Papal Rome. This was not merely convenient, it was strategically invaluable. You are certainly not the first to note these profound anomalies. For decades, dedicated researchers have been meticulously puzzling over local peculiarities, stone remnants of what appear to be non-Gaelic structures, arched foundations and worn columns bearing no architectural match in the regional vernacular, dot the inland forests. One particular ruin, known locally as the Burnt Chapel, contains a series of distinctive chisel marks that strikingly resemble stylized Templar crosses, arranged not vertically but in a strange, horizontal arc. Archaeologists once dismissed these as later additions, but a controversial survey conducted in the 1980s revealed that the mortar binding the stones contained crushed shell and a lime composition remarkably similar to that utilized in Templar commanderies across France. It is not definitive proof, but it is undeniably peculiar. And then there is the journal, an obscure document known only through tantalizing fragments and fleeting references, the so-called Codex Macrae, said to have been meticulously copied by a monk in the 15th century from an even earlier Gaelic text. The Codex contains what reads like an oral account of strange foreign ships landing on Mull around the time of the Bruce Rebellion. The men aboard, the text claims, bore no clan tartans but carried weapons stamped with a red seal like fire. They spoke little. They brought boxes too heavy for one man to lift. And they asked only for food, privacy, and stone in the hills. What could that enigmatic phrase, stone in the hills, possibly signify? Some believe it is a poetic reference to ancient burial sites. Others interpret it as a hint at construction, perhaps a formidable vault or a hidden chamber. But the most persistent theory, and arguably the most dramatic, is that something profoundly important was hidden, something that demanded more than mere secrecy. It required the kind of enduring permanence that only stone can offer. Here, we delve into the realm of truly controversial interpretation. The profound notion that Mull was not simply a place of refuge, but rather a vital depot, a meticulous repository, a final lockbox for precious relics, invaluable documents, or dangerous knowledge too volatile to transport further. This compelling idea gained considerable traction after the 1930s discovery of a complex cave system on the island's southern coast, long sealed by a massive rock slide. Inside were decayed wooden chests, badly rotted, yet bearing fragments of metal and glass that distinctly did not match local craftsmanship. The remarkable find was never formally cataloged. Some whisper that the artifacts were quietly removed. Others claim the cave has since been resealed by the government. Yet, in local pubs and among passionate amateur historians, it became famously known simply as the chapel below. Skeptics, of course, invariably roll their eyes. They contend that the Hebrides were far too isolated to serve any meaningful purpose for a fleeing Templar force. But that very isolation is precisely the point. In a world where ruthless kings were systematically combing abbeys and igniting documents, profound obscurity was paramount for survival. Consider this. The fleet that departed La Rochelle may have deliberately split. One contingent sailed to the Iberian coast, another toward Ireland, while a smaller, highly specialized detachment, perhaps carrying the most valuable or most sacred items, might have sailed north, meticulously seeking a place not only to vanish, but to meticulously preserve. Mull, with its unique blend of profound remoteness and natural defensibility, perfectly fits this urgent requirement. There is also a tantalizing callback to the Scottish refuge we explored earlier. A coastal ledger from a church near Oban records the unexpected arrival of goods from the west in 1310. Barrels, crates, and 2 stone tablets written in Latin and code. That record is brief, unembellished, and buried inconspicuously among entries about dried fish and sheep tithes. But it is undeniably there, and it represents the only known reference to foreign stone tablets arriving via sea in western Scotland during that critical period. You may naturally wonder, of course, why no one has subsequently produced these artifacts, why no grand archaeological excavation has unearthed a chest conspicuously marked with the Templar cross, sealed in wax bearing a chalice or a golden head. Perhaps it is because such treasures do not physically manifest in the way we romantically imagine. Perhaps they have long since crumbled into dust. Or perhaps they were never intended to be found, only meticulously protected. That profound insight leads us to an open question, still hotly debated among scholars and intrepid seekers alike. If the fleet indeed came to Mull, was it intended as a mere waypoint or as a final permanent ending? Some assert that the Templars constructed nothing here, that they simply handed over their precious cargo to local allies, then vanished once more into the boundless Atlantic. Others adamantly insist that the remains of a northern commandery lie buried beneath a field, now utilized for sheep grazing, covered by layers of stone and forgotten memory. Still others firmly believe the fleet never landed here at all, that the captivating stories of strange ships and southern weapons are merely local attempts to imbue mystery into myth, a charming way of transforming ruin into compelling legend. But then you recall the resonant voice of the travel journal mentioned previously, the monk who offered bread to cloaked men bearing foreign coins. You remember the hushed voices in Brittany, the intricately coded letters, the conspicuously burnt names in papal scrolls, and here, in this quiet, secluded inlet on Mull's southern coast, it all begins to echo with profound significance. You stand at the mouth of the cave, whether real or vividly imagined, where the ceaseless wind howls like a voice too long entombed. You feel the cool, damp stone under your palm waiting, and you begin to realize the fleet may not have simply escaped. It may have deliberately anchored itself into the very bones of this ancient place. The wind shifts again, now blowing southward, warmer, drier, and imbued with a different kind of saltiness. You leave behind the slate-gray skies of the Hebrides and descend toward sunlit stone, toward the brackish Atlantic waters off the coast of Portugal. The air here carries the distinct scent not just of salt and fish, but of age-old defiance, of an Iberian kingdom that, uniquely among its peers, resolutely refused to condemn the Knights Templar. When the papal decree, heavy with excommunication and arrest orders, finally arrived in Lisbon, the Portuguese crown visibly flinched, then stalled. King Dinis, famously known as the Farmer King, did not burn or imprison the Templars. He did not dissolve them, not truly. Instead, he simply renamed them. The Order of Christ would eventually emerge as a spiritual successor, officially unlinked from the disgraced Templars, yet suspiciously identical in its fundamental structure, its membership, and indeed, its naval capacity. But that, compelling as it is a tale for another night. For now, we linger in this crucial space between when the ships might still have borne the Red Cross and the name of the temple still stirred profound unease. There is a well-established historical truth that undeniably anchors us here. Portugal, unlike the majority of Catholic Europe, did not actively participate in the zealous Templar suppression. While the French king hunted the order with relentless zeal, King Dinis shrewdly delayed, meticulously negotiated, and ultimately restructured, And during that critical window between 1307 and 1312, Portugal became a quiet, indispensable haven. This leads to a pressing question. Did any part of the fleeing fleet ultimately make landfall here? Templar properties in Portugal had long been robust and extensive. Fortresses such as Tomar and Pombal served as both formidable military outposts and crucial regional administrative centers. Coastal holdings near Setúbal and Lagos were particularly well suited to receive incoming ships, especially those meticulously seeking discretion. These ports were relatively small, highly efficient, and closely tied to monastic authorities who answered more readily to the crown than to the pope. One obscure detail from the Tomar archives stands out significantly. A ledger from 1308 mentions the unexpected arrival of 3 ships carrying foreign timber, cloth of strange dye, and barrels not counted in previous records. The ships are conspicuously unnamed. The crews are unlisted, but the phrasing is curiously evocative. Goods received from the Brotherhood beyond the wind. Beyond the wind. It is a poetic euphemism, possibly nautical slang, or perhaps a subtly veiled reference to something that arrived not merely from across the sea, but from definitively outside the reach of Rome. Skeptics argue it was simply a trade misnomer or a metaphor, but it notably coincides with the sudden uptick in construction activity around the Tomar fortress. New masonry work, new wells being dug, tunnels being reinforced. Again, while nothing definitively proves a Templar connection, the timing feels far more than merely circumstantial. There is also the matter of the salt ledger in Tavira. In 1309, the port records indicate a minor but peculiar adjustment in taxation. Several inbound vessels were granted waivers, a privilege usually reserved for royal transports or papal cargo. The entries are sparse, but an annotation beside one reads, "By order of the Quiet Seal." No known Portuguese bureaucracy operated under such a name. Historians have speculated it was an internal designation used for sensitive or confidential shipments. Some link it to the early precursor structures that later formed the Order of Christ. Others, more boldly, suggest it was a definitive Templar code name. And this is where matters transcend mere logistics and become profoundly symbolic. Portugal was not merely a place of refuge. It was a kingdom poised precariously on the edge of something entirely new. The Reconquista was still ongoing, but the horizon had begun to subtly shift. Mariners gazed intently westward. Cartographers whispered of distant islands. And the Templars, ever fascinated with boundaries, with profound knowledge, with the very essence of motion, might have intuitively sensed what Portugal truly represented. Not a mere hiding place, but an indispensable starting line. This compelling observation leads to the controversial interpretation that some elements of the fleet did not flee to Portugal simply to disappear. They came to meticulously prepare. It undeniably sounds romantic, but consider the corroborating evidence. Within a few decades, Portugal decisively becomes the undisputed cradle of European exploration. Henry the Navigator, frequently linked to the Order of Christ, meticulously funds expeditions that eerily echo routes once rumored to have been expertly charted by the Templars. Portuguese ships sail farther, faster, and with an uncanny confidence in winds and currents that had utterly baffled their contemporaries. Their maps are demonstrably superior, their navigational guesses bolder. Did they inherit more than just ships? We recall from earlier chapters the compelling hints of Templar exposure to advanced navigation, perhaps through invaluable Arabic sources in the Levant, sophisticated star charts, astrolabes, and knowledge carried not in treasure chests, but in the brilliant minds of scribes and helmsmen. If that invaluable knowledge required a safe harbor, Portugal was, by all logical accounts, the paramount destination. There is even a tantalizing callback to the night sails under prearranged light mentioned in the Brittany letter. One curious detail, often overlooked, is that the exact same phrase was also found in a marginal note in a Portuguese devotional text from 1311. The very same phrase, identical wording, merely a different language. Could it have been a password, a crucial code passed across distant shores? Open scholarly debate rages around this possibility. Some contend it is merely coincidental that we read too much into shared poetic turns of phrase, but others argue forcefully for continuity, that Portugal did not simply adopt scattered remnants of the Templar order, but rather absorbed it virtually intact. If so, the fleet's disappearance was not a retreat. It was a profound transformation. You stand now in the imposing shadow of Tomar Castle. The sun hangs high in the sky. Olive trees rustle gently in the breeze. Children play boisterously near ancient stone walls, older than their very surnames. But beneath your feet lie catacombs, and in those catacombs, sealed vaults, perhaps nothing more than ancient bones and aged wine. Or perhaps a flag, a meticulously carved map, a compass drawn by a hand that once gripped a Templar helm. Here the past does not feel buried, it feels meticulously veiled. And the fleet? It may not have vanished at all. It may have simply quietly changed its colors. The banners now hang differently. The cross remains, yet its form softens, less martial, more rounded, echoing both a profound continuity and a clever camouflage. The year is 1319. You stand once more beneath the towering walls of Tamar, but this time, not as a silent witness to desperate flight or meticulous secrecy. Now you observe something altogether subtler unfolding. The Knights Templar are officially gone, executed, dissolved, defamed. Yet here in Portugal, they are very much alive, reborn under a new designation, with old familiar hands at the helm, the Order of Christ. This is one of the few historical facts unequivocally acknowledged by all sides. King Dinis of Portugal, confronting immense papal pressure to entirely disband the Templars, ingeniously devised a legal workaround. He proposed the creation of an entirely new order. Its purpose? Religious, of course, protecting the faith, defending the kingdom. Its structure? Meticulously modeled on monastic ideals. Its members? Curiously similar to those who had once served in distinctive white robes trimmed in red. The Pope assented, perhaps reluctantly, perhaps pragmatically. After all, the Iberian Peninsula was still deeply engaged in the slow-burning conflict of the Reconquista, and the Church desperately needed knights, even if they wore slightly different robes. In 1319, Pope John XXIII issued the papal bull Ad Extirpanda, formally authorizing the Order of Christ and transferring many of the Templar properties in Portugal into its custody. That transfer was not merely a superficial reshuffling of paperwork, it was a carefully calculated resurrection. The newly created order inherited not only vast lands and formidable castles, but also commanderies, sophisticated coinage systems, and most tellingly, ships. Portugal had always possessed a robust maritime culture, but the strategic infusion of Templar naval assets provided it with a quiet, sudden, and significant boost. Fleets once conspicuously marked for seizure were quietly re-registered under a different name. Crews once branded as heretics were absolved and reassigned. Yet one cannot simply change uniforms and erase deeply ingrained memory. Within the very first generation of the Order of Christ, whispers persistently circulated that these were fundamentally the same men, that ancient rituals had merely been reworded, not entirely rewritten, that symbolic vestiges still lingered in the shadows, crosses etched onto keel beams, stars intricately carved beneath altar cloths, compass roses that pointed not toward Jerusalem, but toward some unknown destination west of the known world. An obscure yet fascinating example emerges from a chapel near Lagoa, where faded frescoes depict robed men gathered around a table. Their tunics bear no overt sigils, but a closer examination reveals ghosted outlines of Templar iconography beneath the surface paint, buried like a deeply embedded memory beneath plaster. One figure gestures toward a scroll, while another points toward a stylized horizon. Above them, an inscription now barely legible reads, Veritas in tenebris, truth in darkness. Coincidence? Perhaps a devotional scene? Or perhaps an astute artist's quiet acknowledgement of what everyone already implicitly knew, that the Templars were not gone, merely veiled. This leads us to a contested yet profoundly intriguing document discovered in the Coimbra archives in the late 19th century, a letter unsigned, dated 1324. It refers to our brethren in disguise and the fleet preserved under holy silence. The Latin is elegant but clipped, strongly suggesting a clerical hand. The letter mentions Tomar and those who steer not by the cross alone, but by the memory of the Ark. Some interpret this as a metaphor. Others firmly believe it alludes to actual Templar ships operating under false flags, still navigating the coastlines of Europe under the covert protection of their Portuguese rebirth. Critics naturally dismiss such claims, noting that the Order of Christ rapidly became a conventional arm of the monarchy, its members evolving into nobles, bureaucrats, and eventually renowned explorers. But that is precisely the point. True power does not always announce itself with the clang of swords. Sometimes it morphs into administrative efficiency, strategic maneuvering, or formidable naval might. Within a few decades, Order of Christ ships were leading groundbreaking expeditions. They meticulously mapped islands, founded burgeoning colonies, and pushed steadily into uncharted seas. And behind many of these daring voyages stood men whose fathers or grandfathers had once proudly worn Templar insignia. Their names changed, their flags changed, but the inherent discipline, the profound secrecy, and the insatiable appetite for the horizon, those qualities remained. Here's where the crucial callback emerges. Remember the anonymous crates from the docks of La Rochelle, the ones marked with cryptic sigils, said to have been loaded under moonlight before the arrests? There is a theory, controversial of course, that some of those crates survived. Not in Scotland, not buried in Mull, but meticulously carried aboard ships that made landfall on the Iberian coast and were quietly transferred to safe custody in Portugal, their contents unknown, their ultimate purpose forgotten or deliberately obscured. This raises the open question. What precisely was the Order of Christ preserving? Was it merely the continuation of Templar property and personnel, or did something far more fundamental pass from one order to the next? Perhaps invaluable knowledge, or meticulously charted maps, or archives too dangerous to allow to perish in fire. This profound debate endures, not just among scholars, but in the very stones of Tomar itself. In the convent's chapter house, a mosaic compass points north, southeast, and toward a distinctive symbol, a stylized ship beneath a cross, not a conventional Christian cross, but the specific flared cross utilized by the Templars, its arms widened at the tips like a signpost meticulously cut by the wind. It is not referenced in any known religious text. No plaque explicitly explains it. Yet there it is, firmly embedded in the floor, as if charting a path no longer officially mapped. And what of the men who walked across it? One record from 1328 mentions a ship departing from Lagos under the banner of the Order of Christ, carrying sealed cargo for the West. No specific destination is listed, no manifest filed, only a cryptic note in the margins. Servitium Antiquum, the ancient service. Was it missionary work or something far more profound? You vividly picture the ship now, not sleek like a caravella, but wide and sturdy, clearly built for formidable ocean travel. Its sails are patched, its hull scuffed, but its crew is seasoned and practiced. And as the sun dips dramatically behind the waves, the ship turns, not toward the familiar Mediterranean, but into the vast, unknown Atlantic, into the deepening dusk. Portugal afforded the Templars more than mere shelter. It bestowed upon them a new name and a compelling new direction. You stand now on a rugged shoreline where the world once conceptually ended. The waves before you roll relentlessly westward, endless and indifferent, carrying only the faint light of distant stars and the subtle tug of unseen currents. In the early 14th century, this expansive horizon was far more than just a physical limit. It represented a formidable boundary between what was definitively known and what was merely speculated. And it is precisely here, at this trembling edge, that the most daring theory concerning the missing Templar fleet boldly takes shape. What if they did not merely hide? What if they deliberately left? It commences, as all compelling legends do, with a single quiet possibility, that some segment of the fleet, under the protective cloak of night and relentlessly pursued by profound betrayal, turned its bows not toward a nearby sanctuary, but directly toward the open Atlantic. They were not merely running. They were purposefully sailing away, away from the intrusive reach of papal authority, away from burning scripts and bitter, vengeful kings, towards something they profoundly believed was already patiently awaiting their arrival. It sounds implausible, perhaps even absurd. How could 14th century sailors successfully cross an entire ocean centuries before Columbus? But pause, allow the wind to caress your face. Listen intently to what we undeniably know. There is one unequivocally well-established historical fact, frequently overlooked in this impassioned debate. Pre-Columbian transoceanic contact was not merely theoretical, it possessed undeniable precedent. The Norse had already reached North America by the late 10th century. Their settlements at L'Anse aux Meadows in Newfoundland are archaeological certainties, not mere speculation. European ships had, at least on one occasion, successfully traversed the Atlantic and returned, if not in vast numbers, then at least as a demonstrable possibility. Now consider the Templars. They were not mere soldiers. They were brilliant logisticians, astute cartographers, and unlike Viking raiders who navigated primarily by dead reckoning and starlight alone, the Templars possessed access to emerging Arabic navigational tools, sophisticated astrolabes, quadrant variations, and perhaps even early magnetic compasses, knowledge meticulously passed through Moorish sources. They had studied extensively with Eastern scholars. They had diligently recorded winds, meticulously tracked tides. They had observed the celestial heavens from both desert monasteries and towering sea forts. They were not merely guessing. Therefore, when the fleet mysteriously disappeared from La Rochelle with fully stocked hulls and crews rigorously disciplined in the art of secrecy, perhaps they were not hiding from history at all. Perhaps they were deliberately aiming for it. There are stories, obscure, inconsistent, yet persistently recounted, of landfalls in the West. In the Azores, ancient stones are etched with crosses that no one could definitively date. In Madeira, seasoned sailors spoke of ancient ruins already present upon their arrival. On the Cape Verde Islands, rumors circulated of fair-skinned men who arrived from the east long before the generally accepted age of discovery. Most historians casually dismiss these accounts as colonial misinterpretation or simple folklore. But they collectively echo something far larger, a pervasive sense that someone had been there before. One of the most tantalizing clues originates from a 15th century Portuguese chronicle describing an island named Antillia, the island of the seven cities, purportedly discovered and then subsequently lost again. Supposedly settled by bishops fleeing the Moors, Antillia appeared on several maps before vanishing into the realm of legend. But in one early version of the tale, the voyagers who successfully reached it are said to have followed a red cross in the stars, a phrase so metaphorically rich it powerfully defies easy dismissal. Did the chronicler mean a constellation, or was it a direct reference to sails? The controversial interpretation here is that Antillia was more than just a myth, that it preserved in veiled allegory a memory of Templar ships successfully crossing the ocean and establishing a hidden outpost. Perhaps not precisely in the Americas as we now define them, but somewhere strategically between. An island, a secure refuge, a halfway world. Even stranger is a line discovered in a 14th century English monastic diary, meticulously buried in the Bodleian Library. The monk, recording news from sailors returning from Iberia, writes of French knights cast far west who sing mass by a broken sun. The enigmatic phrase broken sun has profoundly perplexed translators. Some suggest it refers to heavily clouded skies, others to a solar eclipse. But the mention of mass, and specifically French knights, raises significant eyebrows. There were no sanctioned French religious missions sailing west in 1308. Who then were they? Skeptics insist these are simple misreadings, coincidences, or mistranslations compounded over centuries. And perhaps they are correct. But then there is the crucial callback to Portugal, the Order of Christ. Within a mere century of its founding, its ships were reaching the Azores, meticulously charting West African currents and recording wind patterns that were suspiciously efficient for first attempts. These sailors navigated with the precision of men, following ancient, deeply ingrained instructions. Open debate continues vigorously among maritime historians. Did the Portuguese genuinely benefit from suppressed Templar charts? Did knowledge carried on those vanished ships, knowledge of distant shores, cyclical tides, and elusive stars, directly fuel the exploration explosion that followed? One peculiar detail lies in the construction of certain Portuguese ships from the early 15th century. The dimensions of their hulls, broad-beamed and deep, uncannily match descriptions of earlier Templar cargo ships more closely than contemporary Mediterranean designs. These vessels were explicitly built not for coastal hopping, but for immense distance, for profound survival, for the open, restless sea. And always the profound question returns. If the Templars were truly hiding, why risk the immense Atlantic, unless they were not hiding at all, unless they were fulfilling a deeper purpose? Some firmly believe the fleet carried more than mere relics, that it carried prophecy, that among the ancient scrolls and whispered doctrines lay knowledge older than Christendom itself. Not blasphemy, merely a broader perspective. Maps of a world far wider than popes would allow. Records of contact, of trade, of travel long since forgotten. And if that is indeed true, then sailing west was not an act of madness. It was an act of profound obedience, not to Rome, but to something far deeper. You stand now on a Portuguese cliffside, watching the sun dramatically fall into the ocean's expansive mouth. Below, the crumbling ruins of a watchtower dissolve into dusk. You can almost distinctly see the ships again, red crosses fading in the dying light, hulls heavy with an absolute silence. No port calls, no letters, just sails and stars and an unwavering purpose. And the sea, ever willing to meticulously guard its profound secrets. The wind carries a different scent on this side of the world. The trees grow broader, older, conspicuously unfamiliar. The stars overhead shift their intricate patterns, and the North Star, once a steadfast guide for those European mariners, dips noticeably lower into the horizon. You are no longer on the familiar shores of Portugal or within the hidden coves of Scotland. Now, you stand at the very edge of the possible, amidst the nascent breath of the New World, before it was even granted that designation. And the question hangs heavy, profoundly implausible. Did the Templars ultimately make it here? It is a question no textbook will confidently answer, yet one that stubbornly refuses to die. Most scholars would unequivocally say no. They will meticulously point to Columbus and Cabot, to sanctioned voyages and royal charters. They will assert that nothing preceding the Spanish arrival in 1492 truly counts as contact. But history is not always what is explicitly written. Sometimes it is what is subtly hinted at, what slips sideways through folklore and ruin, what rests buried beneath polite consensus. And so we ask again, could the Templars, vanished from La Rochelle, scattered from Portugal, reborn under secret sails, have indeed reached the Americas? Start with the profound oddities. Among the Mi'kmaq people of Nova Scotia, there are oral traditions, passed down for centuries, that speak of pale-skinned men arriving in ships long before other Europeans. These visitors, according to some tellings, came not as conquerors, but as respected guests. They traded, shared knowledge, then mysteriously vanished inland or back across the waves. No concrete artifacts definitively tie these tales to the Templars, but some intriguing fragments do raise eyebrows. On the west coast of Newfoundland, a stone slab bearing a deeply worn cross was found in the 1800s, long dismissed as a hoax. But the cross is not Viking, nor is it Spanish. Its shape unmistakably resembles the splayed-armed Templar design. Erosion and the relentless passage of time have rendered precise dating difficult. But the symbol's proportions uncannily match examples found at Templar sites in Portugal and southern France. Then there is the Kensington runestone, discovered in Minnesota in the 19th century and long derided as a fraud. This inscribed stone purports to tell of a group of Norse explorers who reached the interior of North America in 1362. Its language blends Old Swedish with later dialectal shifts that profoundly puzzled early experts. But among the strange symbols on the stone are repeated carvings that, according to some fringe researchers, echo iconography found on Templar manuscripts. The scholarly community remains fiercely divided. Most entirely dismiss the Kensington runestone. Others point to the curious blend of Nordic and Christian motifs as a possible indicator of joint expeditions, perhaps even conducted under secret orders. Because what if the fleet did not sail alone? There is an obscure yet tantalizing theory that the Templars, desperate and dispossessed, actively sought out allies among the seafarers who had already touched these distant shores. The Norse descendants of Vinland, intermarried communities in Greenland, weather-beaten coastal enclaves, men who instinctively knew the winds, understood the ice, and perhaps crucially knew the way. That theory brings us to the Newport Tower. Standing proudly in Rhode Island, this round stone structure has ignited fervent debate for generations. Mainstream historians classify it as a 17th century windmill, likely constructed by early colonial settlers. But others argue vehemently that the design is far older and deeply Templar. Its circular shape, the precise alignment of its windows to solstice points, and the peculiar keystones utilized in its arches strongly suggest European medieval influence. Some of its architectural elements mirror the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, a structure meticulously studied by the original Templars. Could the tower have been constructed by Templar descendants who settled or explored the region? Of course, speculation is not definitive proof, but then again, history has often been built on far less. Let's revisit a known detail. The fleet's disappearance profoundly coincides with a vast void in documentation, not just in France, but across all of Europe. From 1307 to 1314, there's a conspicuous silence in maritime reports, particularly along the Atlantic-facing regions of Spain and Portugal. This is not merely about one country's records. It represents a pan-European blackout concerning Templar sea movements. If some of those ships left the continent entirely, bound not for hiding, but for reinvention, it would logically explain that profound silence. They did not vanish, they crossed over, and perhaps they returned. A Spanish map from 1345, long kept in a private collection and rarely displayed, features an unlabeled landmass west of the Azores, larger than an island, yet smaller than a continent. The coastline is detailed with harbors marked in careful ink. The name Terra Nova appears in the margin, not as a title, but as a note. The New Land. Its existence predates Columbus by nearly 150 years. Even more curious is a set of merchant logs from Bristol, dated 1470, that mention occasional ships from the west. No names, no flags, just a line of ink noting that these ships spoke little and bartered in precious salt. Some theorists believe these were Basque fishermen returning from Grand Banks waters, but others hold out the possibility, however slim, that these were remnants of a tradition older still, a seaborne secret passed from father to son, from Templar to sailor to trader. And what of the symbols in the American Southwest? In canyons and caves known only to tribal elders, petroglyphs exist that some believe mirror Mediterranean iconography. One in particular, a carved cross within a circle hidden deep in the deserts of Arizona, has been compared to the Templar cross and glory motif. Mainstream archaeologists wisely warn against such dramatic leaps. Cultures often independently arrive at similar symbols, but the location, far from any coastal contact, raises profoundly uncomfortable questions. The open scholarly debate endures. If Europeans arrived in the Americas prior to Columbus, where is the irrefutable evidence? The answer may be elegantly simple. They did not come to conquer. They came to hide, not in force, but in fragments. A handful of ships, a dozen men carving stone, planting vineyards, building chapels that would ultimately be swallowed by earth and time. No banners, no manifest destiny, just silence, survival. And so you walk now along a wooded trail in Nova Scotia or Newfoundland, or perhaps even further south. The birds here sing in unfamiliar cadences. The wind carries the scent of pine, not olive, and yet, somewhere in the underbrush, you catch the faint glint of carved stone, a half-erased cross, a symbol once relentlessly chased by kings. And you wonder, not just if they came, but if they ever truly left. Now, with a deliberate motion, you unroll the parchment. Its edges are cracked with age, curled delicately like dried petals, the ink a rich brown, yet still perfectly legible. You meticulously trace the intricate contours of lands that do not yet officially exist, or rather, shouldn't exist. There, conspicuously to the left of the Pillars of Hercules, is something utterly impossible, a suggestion of coastline where no coastline, according to 14th century cartography, ought to be. Not a mere island, but a definite curve, a substantial bulge of earth that profoundly defies the limits of the contemporary imagination. You stare intently at it, and once again the fundamental question rises like an ethereal mist from the sea. Did the Templars know? This, precisely, is the beating heart of the Atlantic theory's darker twin, the map mystery. Because a ship demands more than mere hope to successfully sail west. It requires precise direction. It requires favorable winds. It requires complex mathematics. And most crucially of all, it absolutely requires a destination. What if they possessed one? There is one undeniable historical certainty here. The Templars, during their protracted presence in the Holy Land, possessed access to Arab cartography and scientific instruments far ahead of contemporary European standards. While Christendom still stubbornly clung to symbolic mappa mundi, circular theological diagrams that placed Jerusalem at the absolute center and blurred the edges into myth, Arab scholars had been meticulously charting coastlines with mathematical precision for centuries. From the 9th century onward, the illustrious House of Wisdom in Baghdad produced sophisticated astrolabes, accurate star charts, and detailed atlases. The Templars, unlike the vast majority of Western warriors, remained long enough in the East to learn profoundly from them. Some firmly believe they meticulously took those invaluable lessons home. One obscure manuscript, referred to only as the Chart of Shadows, surfaced briefly in the mid-1500s in a private library in Bruges. It was said to depict not only Western Europe and North Africa, but also a significant landmass to the far west, conspicuously labeled Terra Nova Incognita. It mysteriously vanished shortly after its discovery, either stolen, hidden, or deliberately destroyed. But a Jesuit scholar who diligently transcribed fragments described Templar-style annotations throughout the chart, including the enigmatic phrase Mare Silentium, Sea of Silence, inscribed prominently over the Atlantic. More strikingly, he noted coordinates that roughly correspond to the eastern seaboard of North America. If genuine, this chart would predate Columbus by nearly 2 centuries. Skeptics, as always, scoff. The manuscript was never formally verified. The Jesuit was, after all, a mystic, but his notes align uncannily with another strange artifact, the Vinland map. Unearthed in the 20th century and still hotly contested, the Vinland map purportedly shows part of North America labeled as Vinland, supposedly drawn in the mid-15th century. Though its authenticity is fiercely debated, chemical tests suggest the ink may be older than once thought. More intriguing still, the map includes notations using Latin shorthand common in 13th century Templar documents. Some scholars believe this is mere coincidence. Others whisper that it is not a forgery at all. It is a meticulously crafted copy of something far, far older. A callback surfaces here from Section 12. Remember the 1345 Portuguese map with its unlabeled landmass west of the Azores? That very same coastal arc appears in 3 other pre-Columbian documents, including the mysterious Piri Reis map of 1513, which claims older sources, and the enigmatic Pizzigano chart of 1424. Each depiction varies slightly, but all suggest a vague yet persistent awareness of Western lands long before their official discovery. So how did they know? The controversial interpretation is simple in theory, yet radical in its profound implication. The Templars may have possessed charts that clearly showed lands beyond Europe, not because they discovered them, but because someone else had, long before, and shared that invaluable knowledge. Consider this. The Templars cultivated close connections with Moorish scholars in the Iberian Peninsula. Córdoba, under Islamic rule, was a veritable haven of astronomy and navigation. If even fragments of ancient Phoenician or Carthaginian sea lore survived into Moorish hands, and from there, critically to Templar scrolls, it is entirely conceivable that whispers of Western shores trickled into their meticulously guarded archives. A tantalizing clue lies in a Templar codex discovered in Tomar in the 1800s, buried beneath the chapel floor. In one section, the text refers to lands beyond the veil where stars bend lower and time unwinds. It reads like poetry, but the phrasing is curiously not mythic but observational. The stars bend lower. That is a precise detail one notices when observing the night sky shift with latitude. There is also an open scholarly debate regarding compass development. Although the magnetic compass was formally adopted in Europe in the 14th century, some argue that the Templars experimented with lodestones and directional tools much earlier. Combined with sophisticated stellar navigation, knowledge passed down from the East, it could have allowed for long-distance sea travel with far greater confidence than generally assumed. Still, knowledge is one thing, willingness is another. Why would they sail west if they weren't absolutely certain? Here's where profound belief enters the narrative. Some Templars were rumored to have embraced esoteric doctrines, intricately mixing Christian mysticism with Hermetic thought and fragments of pre-Christian lore. The concept of a terra sancta as a new holy land was not foreign to them. Could a prophecy or a profound vision have compelled a faction of the fleet to meticulously seek it? Not for conquest, but for preparation, for preservation. One final detail ties the narrative tighter. A 14th century Catalan atlas, meticulously crafted by Jewish cartographers working under the Crown of Aragon, shows a series of compass roses pointing not toward Jerusalem, but out into the vast Atlantic. One of them is marked with a distinctive symbol, Not a star, not a cross, but a double spiral, echoing Celtic and Templar motifs alike. Was it a clue? Or was it simply cartographic flair? You stand now before the great Atlantic again, but this time with a map in your hand. Not GPS, not precise coordinates, just faint lines, impossible arcs, and a single red cross near the edge of the page. You feel a profound pull, not of gravity, but of mystery, and you begin to understand the Templar fleet may not have been running from something. It may have been navigating towards something it had always known was there, a land half remembered, a world half drawn, and perhaps a secret meant not to be conquered, but to be meticulously kept. It invariably comes down to treasure, does it not? Not in the glittering, sensationalized Hollywood sense, no cursed chests or booby-trapped tombs, but in the quieter, far weightier sense. Gold, silver, invaluable documents, sacred relics, profound secrets of both state and soul. When the Templars mysteriously vanished, it was not merely their fleet that went missing, it was also what may have been meticulously concealed within those very ships. And that, more than any other factor, is precisely what has kept tongues wagging and theories spiraling for over 7 compelling centuries. We begin with an undeniable, grounded truth. The Knights Templar were immensely wealthy, monumentally so. Their opulent coffers were filled not by plunder, but by generous gifts and profound trust. Monarchs deposited vast fortunes with them. Pilgrims paid diligently for their protection. Entire villages owed them meticulous tithes. Their assets were not solely in coin, but in extensive landholdings, valuable livestock, timber, and grain. They functioned in essence as the first international banking network. When a nobleman perished in the Holy Land, his belongings often went directly to the temple. When a king urgently sought a loan, it was the Templars who readily financed him. It is a well-established historical fact that by 1307, their accumulated wealth rivaled that of many powerful kingdoms, and Philip IV of France knew this intimately. That, unequivocally, is one reason, perhaps the principal reason, for the widespread arrests. The king was utterly bankrupt. His war chest was severely depleted, and his substantial debts to the Templars were crippling. Destroying the order effectively erased those debts, but confiscating their legendary treasure proved far more elusive. When Philip's men ruthlessly raided Templar commanderies in Paris and beyond, they found meticulous records, extensive ledgers, and diligent scribes, but they found very little actual gold. Vaults stood empty, storerooms abandoned, chests locked but conspicuously light. Where had it all gone? The most enduring and compelling theory is that the treasure was meticulously moved in advance, spirited away aboard the fleet before the king's suffocating noose tightened. The pervasive silence of La Rochelle's port records, the early suspicious provisioning of ships, and the vague confessions coerced under torture all strongly point toward a hasty yet meticulously coordinated evacuation. But here's where the theory branches significantly. Some firmly believe the fleet's entire purpose was to secure that treasure. Not men, not maps, just gold, precious relics, and profound secrets. It was a mobile vault, ingeniously designed not to engage in combat, but to vanish quietly, irrevocably. A peculiar passage in a late 14th century chronicle from Lyon describes oxen pulling sledges southward through the night, under the guise of a funeral procession, with wagons containing unopened chests, meticulously sealed with cord and wax. The profound implication is that even before the ship set sail, Templar riches were discreetly moved to coastal loading points in absolute secrecy. Funeral processions were rarely stopped. Few would dare question a priest solemnly leading a caravan by torchlight, especially not in plague-weary times. An obscure yet compelling anecdote survives from an English knight, Sir Hugh de Havesham, who wrote to a relative in York in 1311, claiming to have heard of Templar wealth cast into caves of the Atlantic-bound cliffs. The wording strongly suggests a hidden coastal cache, possibly never intended to be recovered, simply to be kept utterly out of reach. And here enters one of the more controversial interpretations, that the Templar treasure was not solely material, that it included invaluable scrolls, writings, and artifacts whose true value was not monetary, but theological or profoundly political, secrets capable of irrevocably damaging the church, or at the very least its pristine reputation. Among the accusations leveled during the Templar trials were repeated references to strange rituals, peculiar oaths, and the worship of a mysterious head. Most historians view these as fabricated charges, cruelly induced under duress. But others believe there may have been something symbolic at the core, an object or text representing unorthodox knowledge, not necessarily heretical, but inherently dangerous to the rigid dogma of the time. If the Templars indeed possessed such items, the pressure to conceal them would have been immense. Recall from earlier chapters the crates conspicuously marked with serpents or loaded under moonlight, and the phrase from the Brittany letter, cargo of uncertain value. That exact phrase appears again, interestingly, in a 14th century Portuguese port log at Lagos. The very same wording. Not a mere coincidence, perhaps, but a code, a discreet shorthand understood between brethren, something profoundly grasped, but never explicitly written outright. So where could the treasure have gone? Some suggest it was meticulously divided. A portion was cleverly smuggled to Scotland, as we explored in Mull. A portion was carefully carried to Portugal, hidden within the formidable strongholds of what would become the Order of Christ. And a third portion, perhaps the most precious and volatile, was set adrift on ships bound west, beyond the reach of any earthly throne. That westward arm of the theory has inspired countless books and endless speculation. Treasure hunters speak of Templar gold buried in Nova Scotia, or in the hidden caves of the Azores, or even in the murky swamps of Southern America. Oak Island, in particular, has become a veritable shrine to the theory, with shafts and intricate traps said to guard treasure too sacred or too dangerous to recover. There, too, symbols attributed to the Templars have been found. Crosses carved into stone, boars arranged in precise geometrical patterns, clues half erased by water and the relentless passage of time. Open scholarly debate continues as to whether these signs are genuine or the product of later fantasy, but the sheer persistence of the symbols and their uncanny resemblance to known Templar marks remains profoundly difficult to ignore. Even in France, at Gisors Castle, legend tells of a hidden vault beneath the hill where Templar gold was supposedly buried before the fleet set sail. Excavations in the 20th century revealed empty chambers, but nearby, carved deep into the wall, was an enigmatic phrase in Latin, non omnis in terra est. Not all is on earth. A message? A clever red herring? Or a poignant reminder? The callback here is subtle yet pointed. In Section 7, we meticulously explored the erasure of records, the deliberate silencing of what should undeniably have been documented. Perhaps the treasure was not just hidden in caves or ship holds, but in absence itself, in places never written down, in a silence practiced like a fine art. You kneel now on a rocky cliff, the wind at your back, facing the endless shimmering blue. You press your hand to the ancient earth and wonder, not what glitter might lie beneath, but what profound truths were buried to keep the world either safe or blissfully ignorant. And you begin to realize the treasure may never have been intended to be found, only to be meticulously kept from those who would inevitably misuse it. You walk now within the shadows, not the oppressive darkness, but the soft, reverent hush of stained glass silence. The soaring vaults of a Gothic cathedral rise majestically above you, stone ribs holding aloft centuries of contemplation. The air carries the distinct sense of candle wax and damp stone, of countless prayers absorbed into ancient limestone. Yet it is not the lingering echoes of choirs or fervent sermons that you are seeking. You are listening for something far quieter, something subtly carved into the margins, scratched almost imperceptibly into the wood of a pew, ingeniously hidden in plain sight. Because if the Templar fleet indeed vanished to meticulously protect something or multiple things, those who remained behind may well have left a trail of breadcrumbs, not bold declarations, nothing so obvious, merely elusive ciphers. One undeniably well-established fact, easily overlooked, is that many Templar churches and chapels across Europe remained untouched during the brutal purges. While royal forces aggressively seized urban commanderies and visible assets, rural structures, especially isolated churches, were often either ignored or simply forgotten. In these hallowed sanctuaries, stonecutters and masons continued their meticulous work, some perhaps still harboring deep loyalty to the fallen order. And it is within these very structures that we begin to uncover a compelling tapestry of symbols. The first layer is architectural. In certain Templar chapels, particularly those in southern France and northern Spain, The floor plans subtly deviate from the standard Latin cross. Instead, they uncannily mimic the octagonal pattern of the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, which the Templars had once so ardently controlled. This distinctive design was not merely symbolic, it was remarkably precise, echoing sacred geometries with profound roots in older pre-Christian traditions. Every angle, every meticulously placed column seems to whisper of alignment, calculation, and deliberate intent. But it is the smaller, more discrete marks that ultimately prove more significant. In the port city of Angoulême, a crumbling chapel once utilized by the Templars contains a wall carving, now nearly worn away by the relentless passage of time. At first glance, it appears to be merely a sunburst. But upon closer inspection, the rays conspicuously number 33, matching not only the Masonic degrees that would emerge centuries later, but also correlating with certain coded references found in Templar scrolls originating from the Levant. A stretch, perhaps, but strikingly similar motifs appear in multiple Templar sites, strongly suggesting deliberate replication rather than mere coincidence. Then there are the pervasive ship carvings. In dozens of coastal churches from Brittany to Galicia, tiny ships are intricately etched into the backs of pews, into choir stalls, and even on the undersides of stone arches. Always the same distinctive shape. Single-masted vessels with square sails and deeply curved keels, distinctive features of Templar cargo ships. These are not merely decorative, they are precise, deliberate. Each ship invariably points west, never east, never inland. In one church near Finisterre, the westernmost tip of Spain, a series of these ships are carved along the very edge of the sanctuary. Follow them in sequence, and their angles uncannily match a progression of nautical headings, each adjusted by exactly 11 degrees. 11. The number persistently reappears in Templar iconography, long speculated to represent duality, two ones side by side, standing as silent sentinels. Of course, not everyone perceives codes. Skeptics argue these are simply artistic flourishes, idle etchings by bored masons. But then you encounter the inscriptions. There is an obscure Latin phrase scratched into the lintel of the small chapel at San Juan de Roncesvalles. Nec navis sub lunae lumina, like a ship beneath the moon's light. It appears above a doorway that opens directly westward. There is no record of this phrase in any known hymn or liturgy. And when meticulously mapped against the position of the moon during key maritime tides in 1307, it aligns imperfectly, yet compellingly. A controversial interpretation has gained considerable traction in recent years, that these carvings and phrases collectively represent a coded map, not in the sense of a literal chart, but a symbolic relay, a series of breadcrumbs meticulously laid across Europe for those who would intuitively know what to seek. One recurring carved symbol is a cross within a circle, not the familiar Celtic form, but a flattened circle as if viewed from above, like a seal or a compass. This distinctive motif appears in the Templar chapel in Metz, again in the cloister at Évora in Portugal, and again, faintly, on a sandstone step in a church in southwest Ireland. In each instance, the placement is peculiar, not at eye level, but low, at shin height, as if deliberately intended to be seen only by those who walked, not by those who ruled. There is also the curious case of the stained glass window in the Cathedral of Chartres, depicting a ship with an anchor wrapped in ivy. Ivy, in medieval Christian symbolism, represented memory and enduring strength. An anchor traditionally signified hope, but within the Templar context, some scholars believe the ivy-wrapped anchor symbolized waiting, a fleet hidden, biding its time, deeply rooted in profound secrecy. This leads us to the open scholarly debate. Were the Templars deliberately encoding a message through sacred art, or are modern interpreters simply projecting meaning onto unrelated symbols? Traditionalists argue for coincidence, that churches were always replete with images of ships, stars, and sunbursts, representing salvation and divine journeying. But others point to the sheer recurrence, the specific design elements, the uncanny westward alignment, and the remarkable consistency of symbols across distant geographies. A powerful callback now rises, soft and steady, from section 14. The double spiral on the Catalan compass, a motif powerfully mirrored in a floor mosaic at the Church of Santa Maria de Olival in Tomar. There beneath the high altar, the spiral wraps around a cross. Again, not overt, not explicitly declared, but profoundly felt. There is also the key of silence, a term found in a single codex attributed to a Templar chaplain in Aragon. In his notes, he mentions songs not sung, prayers not voiced, paths not drawn, but shaped by sign. That sounds like mere metaphor. Unless you believe, as some do, that the entire purpose of the carvings was to transmit invaluable information without uttering a single word. This theory has gained considerable traction among cryptographers. In 2007, a team of mathematicians analyzing spacing patterns between carvings in a French abbey discovered a numeric progression uncannily matching the Fibonacci sequence. Was it coincidence or embedded structure? Either way, the carvings persistently continue, in quiet chapels, in half-ruined priory gardens, in abandoned ports where tides now claim the walkways. Each symbol etched like a breath, each message meticulously wrapped in centuries of dust. You walk now through one such church, its windows shattered, its pews devoured by lichen. A single beam of light reveals an engraving near the altar, a star, a line, a curved crescent. Meaningless, perhaps. Or perhaps it is a map of stars utilized by men fleeing west, a memory hidden in stone, and just maybe, a key to unlock the precise path the fleet once sailed. The torchlight flickers erratically as you descend the ancient stone steps, deeper into the vaults of a once Templar commandery, now repurposed, refaced, rebranded. The crosses have definitively changed. The robes are now black instead of white. The unwavering rule of silence remains, but the very language of prayer has subtly shifted. You have stepped into the headquarters of the Order of the Knights Hospitaller, and you cannot help but wonder, did they truly inherit a legacy, or did they cunningly steal a secret? When the Templars fell, the Hospitallers dramatically rose. It is a well-established historical fact that after Pope Clement V officially dissolved the Templars in 1312, a significant portion of their vast property holdings was transferred to the Knights Hospitaller. In theory, this was a pragmatic, strategic realignment. The Church desperately required a loyal military order, one less entangled in complex finance and far removed from the scorching smoke of inquisitorial flames. The Hospitallers, who had long coexisted, sometimes uneasily, with the Templars, were the logical and natural recipients. Lands, formidable castles, manors, even valuable livestock changed hands. But there was something conspicuously missing: the fleet. Ships are inherently harder to seize than land. They float, they move, they vanish. Most documents concerning the Templar fleet, those that actually survived, make no mention of them being absorbed by the Hospitallers. In fact, records of Hospitaller naval expansion in the immediate years following the Templar dissolution are curiously slim. It is only later, in the mid-14th century, that their naval power notably increases. And so, the crucial question emerges: did the Hospitallers take more than just land? Did they acquire the fleet quietly, outside the scope of official transfer? Some historians suggest that former Templar captains simply switched orders, that they merely changed cloaks and continued their vital work under a new designation, but others propose something far more clandestine. One obscure detail comes from a 1313 letter from a Genoese portmaster. He reports a convoy of ships docking at night under neutral colors, claiming Hospitaller allegiance, yet conspicuously lacking proper identification. The crews vehemently refused inspection. The ships were nonetheless permitted to resupply and depart. Their logs cryptically listed sacred goods in transition. No further details. The portmaster's palpable frustration is clear in his closing line. Their banners show the black cross, but their manner shows the red. Could this have been a portion of the Templar fleet cleverly masquerading under a Hospitaller identity? The controversial interpretation is that the Hospitallers either knowingly sheltered fragments of the Templar fleet, or more alarmingly, actively intercepted them. Some accounts from Malta, recorded centuries later, describe ancient ships arriving from unknown seas, bearing relics and charts, meticulously stored in the lower vaults of Hospitaller fortresses. These were not mere war trophies. They were stored, kept quiet, and in some cases, lost to the relentless march of time. The very idea of an intense rivalry between the two orders adds a darker possibility: that the Hospitallers did not merely inherit the Templars' assets, they cunningly usurped them. Evidence of friction between the two orders dates back to the Crusades. While both orders served valiantly in the Holy Land, their overlapping jurisdictions frequently sparked tensions. Disputes over territory, influence, and crucial funding were commonplace. Some accounts even describe physical confrontations between knights of the rival orders. So, when the Templars fell and the church turned to the Hospitallers, was it truly an act of favor or simply one of profound convenience? A callback is due here from Section 7, where we meticulously examined the sudden pervasive silence in the records following the Templar arrests. What if that silence was not just absence, but deliberate suppression? And who would benefit most from a missing fleet never resurfacing? Consider the compelling possibility that a faction within the Hospitallers orchestrated a soft absorption, that certain Templar commanderies were seamlessly folded into the Hospitaller network without full disclosure. That maps, scrolls, and artifacts never made it to Rome, but instead were redirected, subtly reinterpreted as Hospitaller history. One account from Cyprus in 1316 tells of a forgotten fortress, newly reopened by Hospitaller hands. Inside, scribes recorded documents of unknown tongue and curved compass tools, later sent inland for analysis. The description uncannily matches reports of Templar navigational gear, yet no such items appear in the Hospitaller inventories officially filed with the Church. There is also the open scholarly debate over the sudden, inexplicable rise in Hospitaller exploration activity in the decades immediately following the Templars' fall. By the 1350s, Hospitaller ships begin appearing in records far outside their former zones of influence, in North Africa, the Western Mediterranean, and even near the Canary Islands. Their logs, what few survive, cryptically reference routes established by brethren before the flame. The flame, a term some believe refers directly to the Templar burnings in France. Was this an explicit acknowledgement of inherited knowledge, or a quiet, veiled confession? Further complicating the picture are the secretive rituals that began to emerge within the Hospitaller order in the 15th century. Rituals involving solemn oaths of silence, coded prayers, and intricate geometric symbolism, conspicuously absent from their earlier practices. One such rite involved a map marked not with geographic names, but with constellations. The ceremony is referred to cryptically as the reorientation. Whether this was a spiritual metaphor or an encoded voyage plan remains profoundly uncertain. And then there is the undeniable matter of Malta. When the Hospitallers finally took control of the island in 1530, they swiftly transformed it into an impregnable naval bastion. Deep vaults were meticulously carved beneath the city of Valletta, labyrinths of stone said to house relics from every corner of Christendom. In one vault, sealed until the 19th century, workers discovered sealed amphorae, ship planks, and a rusted anchor etched with a symbol not matching Hospitaller heraldry. It matched the distinctive Templar cross. The artifact now resides in a private collection, its provenance fiercely disputed, but its discovery reignited the compelling theory that some ships, some relics, and some profound knowledge passed from one order to another, not in broad daylight, but in the deepest shadows. You stand now at the shoreline near Rhodes, where the Hospitaller fleet once stood, formidable guard against the surging Ottoman tide. The waves lap gently against ancient stones, and you wonder, did these very same tides once carry vessels marked not by black crosses, but by red? Did a silent handshake or a swift dagger decide their ultimate fate? And in that profound quiet, beneath the thunder of waves and within the silent vaults alike, a truth flickers like a dying torchlight. The Templars may have been erased by kings, but their invaluable secrets may have been cunningly adopted by rivals. The lanterns gently bob on the water, casting faint, shimmering reflections. You stand at the very edge of a Venetian dock, enveloped by a quiet grandeur. Canals like intricate veins, palaces gleaming with faded gold, and gondolas gliding past with an almost choreographed grace. But beneath the shimmering surface of this city's undeniable beauty lies something far more profound: commerce, intricate intrigue, a centuries-old genius for profound discretion, and somewhere, in the pervasive whisper of salt air and ancient coin, the faint, lingering trace of missing ships. Of all the formidable powers in medieval Europe, Venice was uniquely positioned to both know everything and, crucially, say nothing. A fundamental historical certainty anchors us here. By the late 13th and early 14th centuries, Venice stood as one of the wealthiest maritime republics in the entire world. Its extensive trade routes stretched from Constantinople to Alexandria to London. Its shrewd diplomats forged intricate deals with popes and sultans alike. Its powerful navy could rival entire kingdoms, yet it preferred to win its conflicts through meticulous ledgers and cunning contracts rather than direct battle. So when the Templar fleet mysteriously vanished in 1307, the Serenissima may not have publicly sounded an alarm, but it is profoundly difficult to believe they were not meticulously observing. It is well documented that the Templars maintained and established significant presence in Venice. They owned valuable warehouses, extensive wharves, and private berths. Their ships moved in and out of the Venetian lagoon regularly, often under less scrutiny than other foreign vessels, due to long-standing, mutually beneficial arrangements with the Doge's council. Templar cargoes frequently bypassed regular tariffs, an arrangement quietly accepted in exchange for the order's reliable transport of goods and precious relics from the East. Yet, after the arrests in France, those ships simply ceased appearing in Venice's formal registers. Not all at once, not conspicuously, but gradually and completely. And here the shadow trail truly begins. A ledger fragment from 1308, discovered in an old chest once owned by the prominent merchant Niccolo Diedo, conspicuously lists 7 vessels newly acquired for use under guild standard, origin unlisted. This intriguing note appears alongside several adjustments in dock space assignments and grain tariffs. What is remarkably odd is that no corresponding sales or purchases are recorded for that specific year. No known noble or merchant had divested an entire fleet, and yet these ships were suddenly, inexplicably there. Were they Templar? It is these small, persistent inconsistencies that truly draw attention. The names of the vessels are either left blank or are unusually abbreviated. The captains are listed only by first name, and their documented routes are all westbound, toward Iberia and North Africa, destinations far outside the normal Venetian commercial focus at that time. This leads us to the controversial interpretation. Venice did not merely observe the disappearance of the Templar fleet, it actively helped repurpose it. Venice had no reason to publicly ally with a condemned order, but pragmatism often trumped morality in the Republic. If a group of ships, well-built, expertly crewed, and utterly untraceable, suddenly required a new identity and ownership, Venice possessed both the extensive infrastructure and the potent motivation to quietly absorb them. It was unequivocally better to rebrand them than to allow those valuable assets to fall into the hands of rivals, or, worse, to simply rot in disuse. One peculiar chronicle from the Abbey of San Zaccaria tells of a group of strange brethren who arrived by sea in early 1309. They bore letters of passage stamped with wax, but no seal the abbey recognized. The chronicler notes that their clothes were monastic but foreign, their speech clipped, their purpose unclear. They stayed 3 nights, then mysteriously vanished. No names are given, but in the margins of the same chronicle, a later monk added a faint note: Templari o quod remanserat eorum. Templars, or what remained of them. Some believe this visit was a scouting mission, an attempt to negotiate safe harbor or vessel conversion with sympathetic merchants, or perhaps with the powerful guilds, those influential merchant families whose sway often rivaled that of the Doge himself. A crucial callback slips into view. Remember the sealed cargo for the West mentioned in Section 11. A remarkably similar phrase appears in a dock inventory from the Arsenal of Venice in 1310. Sealed crates from anonymous convoy to be stored until further instruction. Again, no sender, no destination. The crates were described only as heavy, reinforced, and bearing unfamiliar symbols. No indication of their ultimate fate survives. An open scholarly debate persists around whether Venice acted as a cunning middleman, not harboring the fleet permanently, but expertly laundering its identity. Consider how easily sails can be changed, crests repainted, crews reassigned. Venice, with its immense network of skilled notaries, experienced shipbuilders, and shrewd brokers, could transform a fleet's identity in a matter of weeks. A Templar cog could swiftly become a merchant bark with a Genoese-sounding name. Records could be meticulously corrected, origins rewritten, and perhaps they were. Supporting this theory is the unusual behavior of Venice's maritime courts in the decade after 1307. Several cases appear in the archives where ownership of ships was disputed, yet the ships themselves conspicuously lacked prior documentation. One judge, in a ruling from 1311, declared that the origin of one vessel could not be proven, but no evidence of illegality could be sustained. In other words, it came from nowhere, but no one could officially confirm how. Even more compelling is an architectural detail subtly hiding in the church of San Giovanni e Paolo, where carved into the frame of a side altar is a stylized compass rose. Its center, intriguingly, does not point north but west. Beneath it, faint Latin reads Ad Mare Redemptum, to the redeemed sea. It is not part of any known liturgical tradition. It appears only once in that specific location. Some interpret it as an homage to salvation, others as a profound map. And if Venice indeed helped the fleet vanish, what did it gain? Ships, loyalty, and valuable secrets. It is plausible that some of the Templars' more controversial documents on relics, forbidden rituals, or intricate finance passed into Venetian vaults. Perhaps that knowledge helped shape future dealings with the church. Perhaps it fueled later ventures into advanced cartography and colonial commerce. Venice rose rapidly in the 14th and 15th centuries, cementing its place not just as a prominent merchant republic, but as a formidable maritime intelligence power. Yet the most haunting evidence may not be found in paper or stone, but in profound absence. In the Doge's logbooks, an entire section is missing from spring 1308, torn out, not carefully removed, but violently ripped, leaving a jagged edge of vellum. The previous and following pages are intact. Why was it removed? What was meticulously written there? You stand now in the shadows of Venetian colonnades, the wind tugging gently at your cloak. Below your feet, the stones are slick with sea spray and the accumulated wisdom of centuries. You glance over your shoulder. No soldiers, no monks, no inquisitors, just the gentle, rhythmic slap of water against mooring posts. And in the fog, a ship, faint, silent, its sail trimmed in black. Or was it once red? Venice never needed to overtly hide a fleet. It only needed to rename it. It commences with a single, unassuming sail, not the distinctive red-crossed canvas of Templar legend, but something far plainer, striped or solid dyed in common colors, virtually indistinguishable from a dozen other merchant vessels diligently hugging the coasts of the Mediterranean. The hull bears no crest. The captain offers no lineage. There is nothing overtly holy or heroically conspicuous here, just a ship utterly anonymous. But scrutinize it closely. The timbers are ancient, yet meticulously kept. The lines are too clean, the rigging too precisely efficient. The crew speaks little, works with exceptional swiftness, and answers to no known guild. You have encountered this ship before, or one uncannily similar, perhaps in France, perhaps in Portugal, perhaps within the dark, forgotten pages of a long-lost ledger. Welcome to the compelling theory of maritime disguise. By 1310, merely a few years after the cataclysmic Templar arrests, the Mediterranean buzzed with anonymous vessels. Ships that moved like silent ghosts through waters long patrolled by kings and cardinals. Their papers were vague, their flags shifted with the prevailing wind, and their names were perpetually new, perpetually forgettable. This is not mere conjecture. There is a well-established historical fact that during the early 14th century, the use of false flags and altered identities among ships surged dramatically, particularly among traders operating out of ports like Barcelona, Marseille, and Pisa. The rise of pirate threats, shifting royal allegiances, and widespread economic instability rendered disguise an absolute necessity. But for a vanished fleet meticulously seeking permanent concealment, it was, quite literally, salvation. There is one particularly striking record from 1312, meticulously filed in the maritime archives of Majorca. It describes a ship known as the Santa Corvina, flagged under the crown of Aragon, which docked with a hold full of copper, salt fish, and sealed cargo of religious distinction. The manifest states that the vessel's origin was Genoa, but the very same vessel conspicuously appears a year later in a port register from Valencia, this time under the name Il Leone Nascosto, the Hidden Lion, with an entirely different origin story, now claiming to be from Rhodes. 2 years later, it appears again, now called La Verita, arriving in Lisbon, same keel length, same crew chief, different flags. Some maritime historians have dismissed these discrepancies as mere clerical mistakes or common identity shifts by freelance traders. But others point to the uncanny consistency of the routes and the unusually consistent behavior of the crews. Ships that never remained in port for more than 2 days. Crews who invariably slept on board. No visits to local taverns. No guild interactions. just swift inbound and outbound movements. A callback to Venice is unavoidable here. Section 18's shadow trail of ships mysteriously appearing in registers without explanation. If Venice, with its bureaucratic sophistication, could facilitate this kind of identity laundering, then the open seas became the ultimate haven. Once a ship departed a port under one flag, there was nothing to prevent it from raising another. This leads to a controversial interpretation. The Templar fleet did not simply vanish, it expertly blended in. It was absorbed into the existing maritime economy, masquerading as unassuming coastal cargo haulers, grain runners, or minor warships for hire. But beneath the surface, they steadfastly retained their discipline, their profound mission, and perhaps even their sacred cargo. One obscure document from Pisa's Maritime Tribunal in 1315 references a dispute involving a foreign vessel refusing inspection on grounds of holy charter. The term was highly unusual, and the tribunal's record notes the argument as unfamiliar to maritime law. The ship in question promptly paid an immediate fine and departed within hours. Its name, Sanctus Fides. No other record of such a ship exists. The tribunal added one more chilling note. The captain bore no banner, but the crew made sign of the cross in the Eastern manner. Not Catholic, not Orthodox, something in between. Could these have been Templars in disguise? The debate vigorously continues. Some argue that the use of false flags was simply too perilous, that medieval ports, though inconsistent, maintained a close watch on unsanctioned vessels. But others point to the vast informal web of maritime practices, the quiet agreements between portmasters and captains, the discreet bribes, the knowing nods. In the right place with the right coin, you could dock under any name you pleased. And here is where the theory truly deepens. The Templar ships may have not only changed flags, but also physically altered their very structure. Evidence exists of vessels being physically modified, masts shortened, decks redesigned, figureheads removed. One wreck discovered off the coast of Corsica, carbon dated to the early 14th century, features hull construction identical to Templar shipwright manuals meticulously recovered in Provence. But no record ties the ship to any known fleet. Its iron fittings bear a cross scratched so faintly into the keel that only under raking light can it be discerned. The cross has arms widened at the ends, distinctly Templar style. More than that, certain Mediterranean dry docks show unexplained spikes in custom work between 1308 and 1312. Not for new ships, but for extensive retrofits. A shipwright in Palermo logged extensive alterations to unlisted vessels, paid in foreign silver. He notes the crews spoke an unfamiliar Frankish dialect and bore no national crest. And then there is the compelling graffiti. In Marseille, beneath the old Templar chapel, a storeroom was uncovered during renovation. Carved into the wall beneath layers of soot and damp is a line of ships, barely knee-high. Each possesses a different flag. The Lion of Aragon, the Fleur-de-Lis, the Maltese Cross, even a half sunburst. But each hull is identical. And next to them, in Latin, the inscription Una forma multi vultus, one form, many faces. An open scholarly debate persists around the ethics of such concealment. If true, this was not merely survival, it was deliberate infiltration, a silent reoccupation of the maritime world by men the church had branded as traitors. But to whom were they truly loyal? To God, to an ideal, or to a profound secret too dangerous to die? The deeper you delve, the more the theory holds water. The timeline matches. The behavior aligns. And the silence once again is consistent. No captured Templar ships, no recorded sea battles, just anonymous vessels carrying unknown cargo under flags that meant nothing and everything. You walk now along the breakwater of an old Catalan port. The rocks are warm beneath your feet. The sun dips low. A fishing boat passes, its flag faded, unrecognizable. You vividly imagine a different time, a different vessel, same size, same silhouette, but aboard, parchment wrapped in oilcloth, a chest bolted shut, a man at the helm who says nothing but watches everything. They didn't just run, they reappeared, everywhere and nowhere at all. The sails you observe now are white, cut low to the water, sharply outlined against the haze of early morning. But they do not bear the cross. Instead, they bear the griffin, the distinctive symbol of Genoa, the maritime republic that, in the early 14th century, rivaled Venice not only in lucrative trade, but in profound secrecy, relentless ambition, and the quiet art of selective loyalty. If the Templar fleet desperately required allies, or perhaps even orchestrators of betrayal, few cities offered both so abundantly as Genoa. Genoa was a profound paradox. It steadfastly professed piety but openly traded with Muslims. It generously sponsored crusades, yet covertly harbored pirates. Its formidable galleys transported grain, luxurious silk, valuable salt, and at times dangerous whispers. Where Venice meticulously negotiated with royal courts, Genoa dealt primarily with individuals, mercenaries, seasoned captains, princes on the run. And in 1307, the very year the Templars mysteriously vanished from the docks of La Rochelle, Genoa was watching, as it always vigilantly did. The historical record is unequivocally clear. The Templars had established dealings in Genoa. They held valuable properties, maintained crucial accounts with influential Genoese bankers, and occasionally collaborated with Genoese shipping interests. A minor commandery existed near the Western Gate, efficiently handling coastal logistics, but it was by no means a stronghold. Genoa was not a Templar city, it was rather a city that could be bought. And that brings us to the compelling theory that the Templar fleet may have passed through or been strategically intercepted by Genoa during its desperate escape. One well-established fact stands out significantly. In late 1307, Genoese maritime records show an unusual spike in private ship leasing, not for routine local trade, but for outbound voyages to unstated destinations. These crucial records were signed off not by Doge officials, but by private notaries, a distinct anomaly in such a tightly controlled port. Even more curious is a record from the Bank of San Giorgio, Genoa's formidable financial powerhouse. In early 1308, a new account was opened under the enigmatic name Societas Fraterna, Brotherhood Company. The account was initially seeded with silver marks and rapidly utilized to purchase ship fittings, rope, pitch, and long-term warehouse leases strategically located near the waterline. No company by that name had ever been recorded before, and 3 years later, it was completely gone. All funds withdrawn, no successor entity, no court record of its dissolution. Was it a shell company, a clever front? Some firmly believe so, especially when cross-referenced with an obscure note found in a letter from a hospitaller in Rhodes. The letter describes a fleet of unknown vessels passing through Genoa, sailing under colors not their own, yet welcomed with coin in hand. He speculates cautiously that these may have been remnants of the expelled, a likely reference to the Templars. This leads to a controversial interpretation, that Genoa did not merely allow the fleet to pass, it deftly brokered its passage for a price. There is ample precedent for such actions. Genoese merchants had long served as indispensable intermediaries between Christian and Muslim states. They dealt extensively in ransom negotiations, complex diplomacy, and vital intelligence. If the Templars arrived with precious relics, immense treasures, or crucial documents, Genoa would not have refused them. But it would have charged dearly. This profound insight opens the darker branch of this theory: betrayal. What if Genoa took them in, then coldly sold them out? A document in the Vatican's archives refers to a 1310 transaction between unnamed maritime agents and a foreign military party stripped of papal protection. The sum exchange was significant. The description uncannily matches Templar profiles. The buyer is not listed, but the implication is chilling. One letter from a Castilian admiral written in 1311 warns of sailors taken on at Genoa who bore old allegiances, and advises extra measures of caution for those whose ships were formerly marked in red. This strongly implies that some ships formerly belonging to the Templar fleet may have been absorbed into other navies, sold off piecemeal, their origins meticulously scrubbed, and their captains replaced. A callback emerges here quietly yet insistently. In Section 19, we explored ships utilizing false flags. Several vessels meticulously traced in that chapter bore structural elements unique to Templar shipwrights: wide hulls, elevated forecastles, strengthened keels. If Genoa acquired such vessels, it might explain how they resurfaced in altered form across the Mediterranean, and perhaps how they disappeared again. Open scholarly debate surrounds a letter discovered in 1903, written by a Genoese merchant named Bartolomeo Cini. The letter, addressed to a client in Cyprus, references a compact made between the Black Sails and the Silent Brothers. The phrasing is ambiguous, but Silent Brothers has been interpreted by some as a coded reference to former Templars, especially those operating under pseudonyms after the arrests. Cini also notes cryptically that the price for silence was not silver, but direction. Direction, not payment, but a map. Could Genoa have accepted the Templars in exchange for invaluable navigational knowledge, charts, secret sea lanes? It would not be the last time. Later, Genoese expeditions significantly benefited from remarkably accurate nautical data, even in territories they had not officially explored. One 14th century Genoese map depicts coastal features of the Canary Islands with uncanny precision, features confirmed only centuries later. Scholars have long debated how such accuracy was possible. Templar charts secretly passed on might elegantly explain it, but there is another theory, even more haunting, that Genoa actively helped fragment the fleet. That ships arriving under cover of darkness were quietly divided, some absorbed into legitimate trade, others handed over to rival powers, some perhaps even sunk, their crews silenced, their cargo seized, all under the plausible deniability that Genoa had so meticulously perfected. And yet not all traces were entirely erased. A set of graffiti discovered in the 15th century undercroft of San Lorenzo Cathedral in Genoa includes a crude carving of a ship bearing the Templar cross, alongside a single word in Latin, venditi, sold. Was it a confession, a warning, or just one last bitter whisper from a sailor who watched his brotherhood scattered by coins and contracts? You sit now at the edge of the old Genoese harbor. The bells ring in the distance. Water slaps rhythmically against mooring posts long since worn smooth. A seagull lands nearby and watches you, patient, hungry, as if waiting for a story to reach its conclusion. But this one does not end here, because even in betrayal, the fleet moved forward. And sometimes the very hands that helped you vanish are the same hands that made you visible again under a different name. You ascend now, slowly, through fog-thick heather and past low, weathered stone walls, dotted with lichen the color of ash and sage. The wind here carries the distinct scent not of salt, but of peat smoke and rain. You are no longer near a grand, bustling port, no longer within a city defined by coin or conquest. This is the quiet country, windswept, largely forgotten, sacred in its own profound way. And scattered throughout its rolling grays and greens are ancient places, holy places, monasteries in Ireland, Wales, Brittany. This is the path of the monastic West, and some contend the final hiding ground of the fleet that mysteriously vanished. It sounds almost quaint at first. Why would ships, massive, war-ready, ocean-faring vessels, end their arduous journey in remote abbeys, precariously perched on cliffs and moors? But history compels us to follow not only overt strength, but also profound silence. And when the world turned unequivocally hostile to the Templars, silence became a commodity far more valuable than sails. Here is the compelling historical truth. Throughout the High and Late Middle Ages, monastic communities situated along the Atlantic-facing edges of Europe served not only as centers of devout worship, but as crucial hubs of literacy, secure storage, and discreet diplomacy. These monasteries possessed extensive guest quarters, hidden libraries, and often subterranean storerooms. They meticulously kept charts, calendars, vital crates, and crucially, they kept secrets. One monastery in Brittany, Saint Mathieu de Finterre, is documented as having received foreign brethren in 1388. The abbey's guest book, partially preserved on tattered vellum, records their stay as brief but solemn. They offered no names, wore dark cloaks, and left behind several sealed scrolls labeled only Testamentum. The pages themselves are lost, but the compelling record remains. There is an even more obscure entry in a 14th century Irish psalter from the Glenstal Abbey region. In the margins of a prayer for travelers, a monk had meticulously scrolled in Latin, Hic sunt notae Dei, sed nec colorem nec nomen portant. Here are sailors of God, but they carry neither color nor name. The phrasing is profoundly odd. Not pilgrims, not priests, but sailors. Anonymous piety. Monks are not often easily impressed by seafarers, but these were distinctly different. The controversial interpretation is that these monastic communities served as crucial safe houses for Templar survivors, and perhaps for precious pieces of the fleet's legacy. Think of it not as the fleet anchoring here, but subtly filtering. Recall from earlier chapters the suggestion that the fleet deliberately splintered, some to Scotland, some to Portugal, some sailing west. But others, Others may have quietly crept into isolated harbors along the Irish Sea, off the rugged coasts of Cornwall or northern Brittany, places where papal eyes simply did not reach, where local lords answered first to abbots and second to kings. Consider Skellig Michael, the monastic island off Ireland's west coast. Its perilous stone steps rise directly from the tumultuous sea, its beehive cells meticulously carved into the cliff like memories frozen in rock. Though abandoned as a full-time residence by the 14th century, rumors persist of temporary reoccupation, short bursts of life, fires mysteriously lit, doors sealed again. Fishermen in the 15th century spoke of red lights burning at the island's peak, a signal no one could explain. Could this have been a contact point? A relay station? A place to securely store something that should not be seen? Open scholarly debate surrounds the question of relic concealment. Some firmly believe the monastic West became the final resting place for sacred Templar artifacts. Perhaps not gold, but invaluable scrolls, books, charts. If a treasure had to be hidden not from common thieves, but from the wrong interpreters, what better place than a silent abbey? Monks were meticulous keepers of words. They copied manuscripts for centuries, and the Templars knew this intimately. Their own records were held not just in commanderies, but in affiliated religious institutions. So when the time came and the fires drew close, the instinct would be to place those records where parchment survived longer than fleeting power. One fascinating callback rises from section 16, where we traced symbolic inscriptions in chapels. A particular motif, a circle with two crossing lines, appears again here. On the archway at the ruined Abbey of Llanthony in Wales, a stone block bears the same mark, now nearly worn away. But underneath it, in a different hand, scratched more crudely, are the letters RTF. Some speculate this stands for Rex Templarius Fugit. The Templar king has fled. It is more likely mere graffiti, but it is graffiti written in Latin by someone who felt a profound need to preserve it. Another trace at the Abbey of Saint-Mathieu in Brittany, where the lighthouse now rises, reveals a set of underground passages sealed in the early 1300s. Their official function remains unknown. A 19th century excavation uncovered long corridors, empty wine casks, and a chest filled not with coin, but with iron keys and parchment scraps. The scraps were illegible. The chest bore no crest, just a single word carved on its lid, memorialia, memory. The callback to section 15 is gentle but unavoidable. The treasure may not have been gold at all, but profound knowledge. And here, at the very edge of Europe, that knowledge could be meticulously preserved, not in opulent palaces, but in the quiet sanctity of prayer. Of course, there are the skeptics. Some claim the monastic connection is mere romanticism, that monks took in weary sailors and nothing more, that any relics once entrusted to them have long since crumbled or been lost to fire, war, and reformation. But others, those who meticulously study patterns in stone and silence, perceive something else. In too many places in too many borderlands are persistent references to unaccounted guests, locked rooms, and manuscripts written in hands not known to the scriptorium. And always, always there is a westward pull, the idea that those who stayed behind were not resting, but patiently waiting. That the monastic cells were not tombs, but vital vaults. You stand now at the edge of a cliffside monastery in Wales, the wind biting but not cruel. The tide crashes rhythmically below, echoing off rocks as ancient as language. Behind you, a chapel door creaks open. Inside, dust, votive candles, a cracked stone font filled with rainwater. You run your hand along the wall, and there it is, just visible in the fading light. A ship carved low, pointed west. The fog descends, clinging low to the water like a spectral breath. You perceive the creak of timber, the soft flap of sails in the windless air. Yet there is nothing discernible on the horizon, only the gentle, rhythmic churn of waves and that peculiar, persistent sensation that someone is watching from just beyond the mist. Not pirates, not mere smugglers, something far older, something that, by all accounts, should no longer exist here. And then you distinctly perceive it, a ship, dark against the burgeoning light, gliding silently without leaving a wake, a crimson cross emblazoned on a pale sail. No flag, no discernible voice, no name. The Templars, they whisper, have returned, or perhaps they never truly departed. Stories of ghost ships are more ancient than lighthouses themselves. But commencing in the 14th century, merely a few years after the supposed disappearance of the Templar fleet, those captivating stories began to assume strange, new forms. Not the conventional tales of phantom galleons doomed to perpetually wander, but something far more deliberate, more specific. Ships bearing the unmistakable Templar cross, meticulously crewed by silent men in faded tabards. Ships that appeared and vanished without ever docking, without ever speaking. One of the earliest recorded sightings originates from 1332 off the coast of Galicia. A group of fishermen swore they saw a ship, high and proud, its sail marked in crimson, though no oars touched water and no man stood at the helm. The report, painstakingly preserved in a parish record, was initially dismissed as mere superstition. But 3 nights later, another group reportedly saw the very same vessel near Cape Finisterre. And a week after that, a strikingly similar description appears in a letter from a traveling merchant near Porto. All identical, all utterly impossible. It did not cease there. In 1395, a Breton nobleman claimed to have encountered a small flotilla of ships bearing crimson marks on pale banners, moored quietly off the Ile de Seine. He approached by rowboat, but the ships silently pulled away, their sails unfurled without apparent crew. When he returned the following morning, they were gone, and no tracks remained on the beach. His account, meticulously written in a personal diary, was not discovered until the 17th century, but it fits the recurring pattern. What then is the pattern? Red crosses, silent crews, no known port of origin, ships that move without apparent resistance, and most crucially, precise timing. Sightings often uncannily coincide with periods of profound turmoil, wars, inquisitions, colonial failures. It is as if these mysterious vessels emerge not randomly, but as stark warnings. The controversial interpretation, of course, is that these are not mere ghost stories at all, but intricately coded messages. That for centuries after their official dissolution, remnants of the Templar fleet remained actively engaged, not in commerce, not in warfare, but in surveillance and meticulous preservation. Their visibility was fleeting by design. A compelling example emerges in 1491, when a Genoese mariner named Sebastiano Morelli claimed to have encountered a white vessel with no herald bearing old Crusader colors while returning from the Azores. He meticulously recorded the position. Days later, a Portuguese ship reported seeing the very same craft moving east. Morelli's logbook was considered apocryphal for centuries, until a copy surfaced in Lisbon's maritime archives, preserved as a curious anomaly. The callback here is subtle but significant. In Section 12, we explored the theory of Templar ships potentially reaching the Americas. What if some had successfully made the crossing and then returned, silent voyages? No port calls, no declarations, just vigilant eyes upon the vast ocean. Watchmen. Another strange account originates from 1543, in a letter written by a Spanish monk traveling along the Galician coast. He describes a moment at dawn when villagers frantically fled from the shoreline, proclaiming that the Red Cross ships have returned. He saw nothing himself, but reported unusual tides and smoke from no known fire. The villagers insisted they had seen the ships before. Only when the world tilts, they said. Was it profound fear or enduring memory? Skeptics naturally dismiss all of this. They argue that the Red Cross is a common symbol, utilized by multiple orders and kingdoms. That ships fade from history not because they sail through mist, but because they simply rot and sink. That folklore proliferates around blank spaces. That ghost ships are precisely that, ghost ships and nothing more. But there is one final set of sightings that defies even the most hardened cynicism. In the early 17th century, off the coast of Newfoundland, Basque fishermen, among the first Europeans to work those remote waters, spoke of a silent vessel appearing near their hunting grounds. The ship bore unfamiliar rigging, its sail marked with a crimson cross not of this world. Several logs repeat the distinct detail. The ship approached no one. It moved against the wind. Decades later, Breton traders reported a similar vessel off Cape Breton Island. Again, no name, no flag, no explanation, just an undeniable presence. What do these accounts truly signify? An open scholarly debate asks whether these sightings are mere projections, myths born of a profound longing for a lost age. Others argue that while the original fleet likely disappeared, its powerful memory lingered in ritualistic sightings and communal imagination. But some firmly believe a fragment of the fleet genuinely survived, that a handful of ships, captained by men utterly devoted to secrecy and purpose, lived on. Perhaps they passed their invaluable knowledge, from generation to generation, not through books, but through meticulous practice. That their routes, destinations, and missions evolved with the centuries, but their profound symbol remained. A red cross, not to declare war, not to seek new lands, but to remember. The idea calls back to the quiet vaults of the Atlantic monasteries, to maps subtly scratched into chapel walls, to symbols meticulously carved under altar stones. What if those were not merely records of escape, but precise breadcrumbs for an eventual return? Because perhaps the fleet never truly fled. Maybe it deliberately divided, drifted, dissolved. But maybe a few ships kept sailing, to bear witness, to patiently wait. You stand now on a lonely beach in Brittany. The fog is thick, the tide relentlessly rising. Somewhere far beyond the horizon, a bell tolls once, low and distant. You gaze out to sea and ponder, not of treasure or fleeting glory, but of profound silence. Moving, watching, still out there. The wind has shifted again, not merely in direction, but profoundly in tone. It no longer carries hushed whispers, but compelling questions. Not fleeting fragments of rumor, but the very weight of conclusion. And so you arrive, slowly, carefully, at the final branch of the path, where every possibility must ultimately converge upon a single, overarching idea. Did the Templar fleet vanish in profound fear, or did it execute a meticulously planned operation? This question transcends mere historical inquiry. It is profoundly psychological, philosophical. A retreat is reactive, a flight. But a final voyage, one meticulously calculated, precisely mapped, and sealed in absolute silence, that is something entirely different. That is a deliberate choice, and choices invariably leave indelible fingerprints. You meticulously retrace them now. La Rochelle, the comprehensive provisioning before the devastating fall, the crates conspicuously marked with symbols instead of names, the sudden, inexplicable absence from port ledgers, and then the pervasive silence. Not scattered, but meticulously structured. No wreckage, no tales of shipwrecks, no noble confiscations, just a void too eerily neat to be accidental. You recall the shadowy trails, Scotland, Portugal, the Isle of Mull, the Order of Christ, and its peculiar, undeniable continuity, the whispered codes and the cryptic cathedral stones, the ships meticulously recarved into pews, the graffiti cunningly hidden beneath altars. Then the maps, the strange prematurely drawn outlines of unknown lands, and finally, the persistent stories of red crosses seen centuries later, gliding through fog, their gaze fixed on the shore. And across every chapter, one unifying theme profoundly echoes back: intent. This was not panic. This was meticulous preservation. The well-established historical fact often overlooked is this: the Templars, by their final tumultuous decade, were no longer merely formidable warriors. They were meticulous stewards of land, of immense wealth, of profound ideas. They had evolved into something far more formidable than simple crusaders. They were adept keepers of continuity. That continuity did not depend on impregnable castles or sharpened swords. It depended crucially on movement, on adaptability, on ships. That precisely is why the fleet held such paramount importance. It was not merely a means of escape, it was an arc. The controversial interpretation, one that sharply divides historians, is that the fleet's disappearance was not the end of a chapter, but the deliberate beginning of a new one. That the Templars, discerning the undeniable writing on the wall, orchestrated their own profound dissolution. On land, they became enduring martyrs. At sea, they became something else entirely. No longer knights, not yet myth, something compellingly in between. One obscure yet compelling fragment found in a Templar prayer book, painstakingly buried beneath the convent of Christ in Tomar, reads simply, "Transitus non est fuga, sed mutatio." A crossing is not a flight, but a transformation. The phrase is subtly nestled beside a passage from Exodus, where Moses leads his people not away from imminent danger, but towards something profoundly veiled in cloud. Could that have been the true philosophical underpinning of the fleet's final, momentous journey? Some firmly believe the Templars entrusted their most sacred artifacts not to any king or pope, but to the boundless open sea. That they ingeniously created a mobile sanctum, a sacred fleet, meticulously designed to carry what could not be contained by stone. That each ship had its own distinct directive. That they deliberately split, one contingent sailing towards Scotland, one to Portugal, one westward into the realm of legend. A powerful callback now to the treasure theory from Section 15. If the most valuable relics or texts were not hidden in static vaults, but set adrift in moving fortresses, then the fleet itself constituted the ultimate hiding place. Destroy the fleet and you annihilate the knowledge. But divide it, scatter it, allow it to sail into deliberate forgetting, and you render the trail nearly impossible to trace, but not entirely. The faint traces persistently remain, in maps, in carvings, in whispers, in ships that seem to mysteriously reappear long after they should have disintegrated into rot, and perhaps even in names. Lineages that change their spelling but not their fundamental purpose. Orders that shed old vows and adopted new crests. There is one final record, as fragile as a spider's thread, from a Templar scribe in 1308. His document, half-burned, bears only two profound lines. We did not fail. We dissolved ourselves. The sea carries what cannot be bound by stone. That is not a confession. It is a powerful declaration. And so now you return one last time to the water's edge. The sky is slate gray, the tide low and restless. You kneel in the sand and draw a simple shape, a sail, a cross, a compass. And you finally understand the final voyage was not an ending. It was a profound choice. The Templar fleet did not disappear. It departed. You slowly exhale, allowing the intricate threads to settle. The mist has cleared somewhat, not entirely, but enough to discern outlines in the deepening dark. You have journeyed from formidable fortress to rugged coastline, from sealed catacombs to drifting silhouettes on the vast sea, and still, the fundamental question flickers like a candle behind glass. What truly happened to the Templar fleet? Not what has been romantically imagined. Not what has been whispered in wine-soaked taverns or dramatically sensationalized in dusty documentaries, but what the concrete evidence carefully, quietly suggests, once the captivating legends are respectfully set aside. So let us weigh it gently, one fragile fragment at a time, beginning with what is undeniably known. The fleet did unequivocally exist. By 1307, the Knights Templar maintained a considerable number of ships, cargo vessels, warships, coastal runners, all expertly operated out of key ports like La Rochelle, Marseille, and Acre before its devastating fall. They possessed the essential infrastructure. They commanded highly trained crews. They transported cargoes of immense and often unregistered value. We also know they possessed critical time. Historical records clearly indicate that Philip IV's order to arrest the Templars was executed with urgency, but not absolute secrecy. Word spread sufficiently, at least to allow sensitive materials to be moved. Witnesses speak of carts loaded under the cloak of night, of monks receiving last-minute guests, of ships sailing days before any official crackdown. Then comes the profound silence. No ship seized, no fleets absorbed, no mass scuttling reported. The port ledgers, meticulously maintained for decades, abruptly go blank. And when voices re-emerge, they speak not in official records, but in intriguing oddities, sudden refittings, anonymous ship leases, and strange sightings of vessels bearing no discernible heraldry, yet possessing an unmistakable confidence at sea. Here the compelling theories blossom. Theory 1, dispersal. This theory posits that the fleet deliberately fragmented, with various parts of it successfully reaching Scotland, Portugal, or even the Americas. This interpretation is powerfully bolstered by localized records such as the guest registries at Tomar, the monastic graffiti on Mull, and the coded phrase, sealed cargo for the West. The sustained rise of the Order of Christ and its forward-looking exploration agenda fits neatly within this framework. Portugal did not merely absorb the Templars' properties, it profoundly inherited their momentum. Theory 2, camouflage. This theory argues that the fleet was not hidden, but meticulously rebranded. Ships with false names and foreign flags mysteriously appear in Genoa, Venice, and across the Western Mediterranean. Their hulls match distinctive Templar designs. Crews pointedly refuse inspection. Flags are changed, and thus, the fleet does not genuinely disappear. It transforms into many fleets, many faces, moving silently through ports too busy or too complicit to ask probing questions. Theory 3, burial. This theory proposes that the most sacred or dangerous elements of the Templar legacy were not intended to be preserved through active use, but through absolute concealment. The Atlantic monasteries, the meticulously sealed vaults on Mull, The underground passages of Saint-Mathieu all point toward a long-term strategy, not the protection of mere wealth, but of profound truth. Scrolls, relics, dangerous ideas, hidden where only silence could ensure their safety. Theory 4, Voyage Beyond. This is the most romantic, yet also the most challenging to dismiss outright. It suggests that a portion of the fleet sailed west, not just into myth, but into a new, tangible memory. The enduring stories from Nova Scotia, the distinctive cross carvings in Newfoundland, the anomalous maps depicting American coastlines before official discovery, all hint at a deliberate movement across the vast ocean. And the strange ships seen centuries later? Perhaps they were echoes, or perhaps continuations. Now consider the counterweight, the skeptics. They argue that the Templars were largely overestimated, that their fleet was far smaller, less organized, less significant, that the ships were quietly sold off or simply fell into disrepair, that no records remain because the order collapsed into utter chaos, that the ghost ships are merely misidentified vessels, the carvings wishful thinking, the graffiti coincidental. They may be correct about some individual points, but what they cannot adequately explain is the chilling precision of the silence, the way records vanish, not haphazardly but methodically, the consistency of the subtle roots, the deliberate reuse of certain phrases in entirely unrelated regions, the persistent westward orientation of ship carvings, the resurrection of Templar maritime strategy under other names, under different banners, in precisely the places the fleet might have landed. And so we are left, not with absolute certainty, but with a compelling, weighted probability. The cumulative evidence across documents, eyewitness sightings, architectural anomalies, and precise timing strongly suggests that the fleet did not vanish randomly. It was not destroyed. It was not forgotten. It was meticulously repurposed. Whether that ultimate purpose was preservation, exploration, or something more profoundly spiritual, the pattern is unmistakable. This was not the chaotic collapse of a maritime empire. It was its deliberate metamorphosis. A callback arises, soft and final, from section 23. Transitus non est fuga, sed mutatio. A crossing is not a flight, but a transformation. The Templar fleet may not have sailed into exile. It may have sailed into evolution. You close the final page of the ledger. The numbers no longer hold meaning. The crimson crosses have faded from the sails, but the distinctive shape remains. You walk out from the crypt, the cloister, the shoreline, and still just over the horizon behind the veil of history, the fleet waits. So now at last you sit with the waves. Not as a relentless seeker, not as a meticulous investigator, not even as a captivating storyteller, just still, listening intently, watching. There is no longer any trail left to meticulously follow, no parchment to unfold, no cryptic symbol to decode. Only the boundless ocean, stretched out in every conceivable direction, whispering the very same rhythm it whispered long before the Templars ever raised a single sail. It does not offer definitive conclusions. It offers enduring echoes. You breathe in the sharp salt air, allow it to deeply fill your lungs. Let it settle precisely where questions once ceaselessly stirred. The fleet that vanished, that scattered, that perhaps never truly departed, remains adrift in the profound folds of time. Perhaps it broke apart. Perhaps it changed names. Perhaps it carried invaluable truth or immense treasure, or simply the quiet, unwavering resolve of men deliberately choosing exile over utter surrender. You have meticulously walked their paths, stood at their very thresholds, touched the ancient stones where they may have fervently prayed, and still, the ultimate answer is not contained within the documents. It is in the distance. Not every profound mystery closes its doors definitively behind you. Some remain ajar, purposefully, like a ship moored just offshore, half seen, half felt. The Templar fleet may never truly reveal itself, not because it cannot be found, but because it was never fundamentally meant to be. Some compelling stories are not solved, they are lived. And as you drift, so too does the final elusive truth. Not buried, not broken, just carried by wind, by wave, by time. The sea remembers, but it does not explain. It keeps, and that ultimately is enough.